I've always loved camping, but not the kind that involves the usual by the lake camping spots most people go to. I'm talking about deep in the forest, miles from civilization, the kind of place where the trees are thick enough to block out the sun and the only sounds you hear are from the wildlife around you. This place I'm talking about, I've been going to for years, ever since I was a kid with my family. It's a special spot, tucked away in a place most people wouldn't even think to look. It's beautiful, quiet, and absolutely serene. It's the kind of spot that you go to get away from everything. So one weekend, I decided to take my boyfriend and 2 other couples out there for a camping trip. My boyfriend, Greg, was a big guy, solidly built, and not someone anyone would want to mess with. He was the kind of guy who made you feel safe just by being around. The other couples, well, they were a little more city-oriented. They liked glamping more than real, rugged camping. The thought of being out in the woods, deep in nature with no access to electricity or running water, made them a bit nervous. Still, they were my friends, and I thought they'd enjoy it. I knew they'd probably be uncomfortable at first, but I was determined to show them what real camping was like. We arrived at the spot a few hours out of town. The drive had been long, and we were all excited to finally get out of the car and start setting up camp. The sun was beginning to set, and the light in the forest was fading fast. There was a slight chill in the air, but the fire we were going to build would warm us up soon enough. I started unpacking our gear while Greg and the others set up the tents. It wasn't much of a hassle, just some sleeping bags, a few stoves, and, of course, a cooler packed with food and drinks. After a while, everything was ready. We gathered around the fire, cracked open some beers, and began to relax. The forest was still, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're the only ones in the world. It was the perfect kind of night for camping. The kind of peaceful night that made you forget the world outside the forest even existed. We were laughing, joking, and enjoying the fire when it happened. At first, it was distant, just a faint voice echoing through the trees. A woman's voice. She was yelling, "Marcus!" very loudly, over and over again. The tone of her voice was distressing. She sounded like she was in trouble, but the thing that caught my attention was the direction from which the voice was coming. It was coming from the east, which was the complete opposite direction from where anyone would be coming from, except for the people who lived out here. The kind of people who knew these woods like the back of their hand. The ones I'd heard rumors about, the off-grid hippies, the tweakers, the people who lived off the grid in their own world, disconnected from society. I instantly went silent. My gut twisted, and my heart started to race. I knew the woods weren't just beautiful and peaceful. They had a darker side to them, and I wasn't sure if I wanted my friends to realize that. Not yet. The last thing I needed was to draw attention to our little group. But of course, one of my friends, Mark, didn't get it. He was the type to think everything was a joke, always trying to lighten the mood, especially in uncomfortable situations. He yelled back, thinking the woman had yelled Marco instead of Marcus. It was supposed to be funny, but I could feel my stomach drop. The woman heard him. She paused for a second, and then started yelling through the dark, asking us how to get to her camp. My instincts screamed at me to keep quiet, but it was too late. She had heard us. I motioned for everyone to shut up, hoping she'd just keep going. But no, she wasn't going anywhere, and that's when the panic set in. She kept yelling at us. Her voice was loud now, and it was mixed with incoherent ramblings and swearing. At one point, I heard her fall down the hill we were on, the sound of cracking wood and a loud crash echoing in the silence. I wasn't sure if it was her tripping or if she'd done it on purpose, but I wasn't about to go check. Then, she blamed us for it, yelling that our fire was too bright, that it had blinded her. But we didn't have any other lights on us, just the campfire. She was definitely high. There was no mistaking it. She was stumbling through the trees, falling over branches and crashing into the underbrush, getting closer with every passing minute. My anxiety spiked. I wasn't sure what she was capable of, but I didn't want to find out. It was a feeling I knew too well, the kind of feeling you get when you know someone's unpredictable, especially when they're on something. I kept my voice low, trying to make sure my friends stayed quiet. "Don't engage. Just stay calm." I whispered to Greg, my boyfriend. He didn't say anything, but I could see the tension in his body. He knew something was off too. We both did. The others? They were too busy laughing at the situation, oblivious to what we were really dealing with. Finally, after what felt like forever, she stumbled into view. She wasn't just any random hiker lost in the woods. No, this woman was a meth head, and she was in very bad shape. Her clothes were torn, and she looked like she hadn't eaten or slept properly in days. Her face was gaunt, and her eyes were wide, constantly twitching. She staggered toward us, mumbling to herself, not making any sense at all. I could feel the tension in the air rise as she got closer. She plopped herself down on the ground next to our camp, right next to the fire, and refused to leave. She didn't ask for help. She didn't ask for anything. She just sat there, demanding food, water, and a place to sleep. She was rude. She was aggressive. And she was high as a kite. Greg stood up, his broad frame towering over her. He reached into the cooler, grabbed a bottle of water, and handed it to her. "You need to leave," he said, his voice low and firm. He wasn't messing around. His tone made it clear that this wasn't a request. But she just glared at him, her eyes wild, and started to whine like a child. She kept going on about how we were rude, how we weren't being kind, and how we weren't God's children. She was twitching and jerking, and I could see the look in her eyes. I wasn't sure what she'd do next, but Greg wasn't backing down. He grabbed her by the arm and gently but firmly pulled her to her feet. He told her again, "You need to go, now." At first, she hesitated. Then, she reluctantly turned toward the direction she'd come from. She wasn't happy about it, but she finally started to walk away. She dropped the water bottle we gave her on the ground and cursed us out one more time. We could hear her as she walked off into the night, still yelling about how rude we were and how we were the worst people she'd ever met. I hoped that was the last we'd hear from her, but that's when I realized something. As she disappeared into the darkness, a chill ran through me. There was no way she had just left. I could feel it in my gut. She was coming back. She already knew where we were. I couldn't shake that feeling, the feeling that something was wrong, that something wasn't over yet. We all sat around the fire trying to laugh it off, but none of us felt safe. Not anymore. It wasn't just about the woman. It was about what she represented. There were people like her out here, people who didn't play by the rules, people who lived in the shadows of the forest. I didn't want to think about it, but the truth was we were in their world now, and they didn't have to follow the same rules that we did. None of us slept that night. Every crack of a branch, every rustling of the leaves, made us jump. We listened for any sound that might indicate she was coming back. I kept telling myself it was fine, that it was over, but deep down, I knew the forest had a way of bringing back the things you thought you'd left behind. And sure enough, hours later, we heard her again. Her voice echoed in the distance, and it was unmistakable. She was back, and this time, I wasn't sure if we'd make it through the night unscathed. By morning, she was gone. We never saw her again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly avoided something worse. I had hoped my friends would learn their lesson. They didn't. They still think camping is all about the pretty lakes and the sunsets. But me, I know better. The forest doesn't care about your rules. It doesn't care about your plans. It's a place where people who don't fit into society go to hide. And if you're not careful, it can swallow you whole. We packed up camp and left early. I didn't say much, but I could feel the weight of the experience pressing down on all of us. It was a lesson learned the hard way, and I hope they'll never forget it. The forest is a beautiful place, but it's not for everyone. Some people know it better than you do, and they don't play nice. We got in the car, and as we drove away, I looked back one last time at the forest. It looked peaceful from a distance, but I knew better. There were people out there, and I wasn't in any hurry to meet them again. It was the late 80s, and I was in my early 20s living in Central Florida. I was working for the Park Service at the time alongside two good friends. One of us, myself included, had done plenty of camping before, but for the other, This was her first real trip out into the woods. I'd grown up camping on every vacation with my family, traveling all over the state, so the outdoors were as familiar to me as my own backyard. We all decided to camp in a quieter, more isolated youth area within one of the parks. It was a spot usually reserved for organized groups, but since it was empty that weekend, we had the place entirely to ourselves. The weather was typical for Central Florida, hot and humid during the day with a pleasant coolness that crept in as the sun dipped behind the treeline. We set up camp early in the afternoon, each of us scattering to do our own thing. I started collecting firewood, a task I always liked, kept me moving, gave me something to focus on, and made me feel like I was really contributing to the camping experience. The forest around us was dense, with towering pines, palmetto, and shrubs filling in the gaps between the trees. It was easy to get lost in the rhythmic sound of my footsteps crunching on dry leaves. But there was something about this place. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the air felt thick in a way I couldn't describe. I would glance around every now and then, sensing movement, a slight shift in the shadows, but whenever I looked, nothing was there. The woods were silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a passing breeze or the distant call of a bird. Despite that, every few minutes the sensation of being watched would crawl up my spine. It wasn't overwhelming or immediate, but it was persistent. I would look around, scan the area, and then shake it off. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, I'd been in the woods countless times. I knew the sounds, the way the forest felt, and the wildlife that lived there. But this was different. I kept working, making piles of dry sticks and logs to bring back to the fire pit. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, I could see the last rays of light slanting through the trees, casting long shadows across the campsite. The air began to cool, and the quiet made it feel as if the whole forest was holding its breath. I wasn't sure what time it was, but I was about to head back when I saw a truck approaching. It was one of the rangers, a man who lived about a quarter-mile down the road. He had a truckload of firewood and a six-pack of beer with him. The ranger was a big guy, a little rough around the edges, but friendly enough. He pulled up, got out, and immediately started unloading the firewood. He tossed us a few beers, and we all sat around the fire, laughing and talking about work. We were used to spending time together on weekends, mostly at different campsites around the state, taking the opportunity to relax and get away from the day-to-day grind. As night fully settled in, we sat there under the stars, the fire crackling and popping. We could hear what was probably a group of teenagers horsing around on one of the nearby trails, a couple of miles away. The ranger, knowing the trails were closed after dark, started up his truck again and told us he was going to go tell them to head back to their campsite. He drove off, leaving my other friend and me sitting around the fire, quietly talking. The night felt peaceful, but there was still that strange tension in the air, a feeling I couldn't shake. The forest was still, too still, like something was waiting for the right moment to make its move. It was then, as we sat there in the dark, that I felt it. A cold chill washed over me, starting at the back of my neck and creeping down my spine. My heart began to race, and I couldn't explain why. The night had been calm, and there was no reason for this sudden rush of fear, but it felt as if something was wrong, something out of place. I didn't say anything right away. I glanced over at my friend, watching her for a moment, and she glanced back at me. Her face was pale and her eyes wide. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," I said, but I didn't want to admit just how deeply unsettled I was. I tried to shrug it off to calm myself, but it wasn't working. Every nerve in my body screamed that something wasn't right, and it only got worse the longer I tried to ignore it. I could see her now, her eyes darting to the surrounding trees, her body tense. She was scared too, I could tell. "Maybe we should go to the car," I said, though I didn't know why I felt so strongly about it. Something in the air made me feel like we were in immediate danger. Not from anything specific, but from something we couldn't see or hear, something that was there but also invisible. I didn't want to appear scared, so I stood up, trying to walk normally, but my legs were shaky beneath me. My friend followed me, her footsteps quiet behind me. We didn't speak, but I could feel her presence, tense and alert. We walked towards the car slowly, trying to appear calm. But halfway there, I couldn't take it anymore. The tension in the air was too much. My body was on high alert, and my heart pounded in my chest. I glanced at my friend, and she looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. Without saying a word, we both broke into a dead run. The headlights of the car were a beacon in the darkness, but they didn't seem like enough to cut through the oppressive silence. We reached the car, jumped inside, and locked the doors without even thinking. I didn't even look back at the campsite. I just stared straight ahead. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, the cold sweat on my palms making it harder to hold on. I reached for my pistol, tucked under my seat. It was a comfort, but it felt completely inadequate for whatever was out there in the woods with us. I don't know how long we sat there, not speaking, not moving, just listening to the night. I didn't want to look around. There was something about the darkness beyond the car's lights that terrified me. I felt as though if I turned my head to look out the window, I would see something that would drive me mad. It was as if the very air around us was charged with a kind of malevolent energy. At some point, I started to feel the tension lift, just a little, like whatever it was that had been out there was moving away. It was subtle, but I could feel the change. The pressure in the air seemed to ease up, and my breathing slowly returned to normal. My friend and I didn't speak. We just stayed there, sitting in the car with the engine off, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The forest around us was still dark, but it no longer felt as oppressive. After what seemed like forever, the headlights of the ranger's truck appeared in the distance. The sound of the truck's engine broke the silence, and I looked up, seeing the two of them in the truck, the ranger and my coworker. They had come back to check on us, probably wondering why we had run off. We didn't even say anything right away. We didn't need to. They could see the fear in our eyes. Later, after everything calmed down, we tried to laugh it off, making light of the situation. But deep down, none of us could shake the feeling that something had been out there, something dangerous, something we hadn't seen but had felt with every fiber of our being. I don't know what it was. Some wild animal, maybe a predator that had gotten too close for comfort, or maybe just the kind of wild, untamed feeling that can take over the woods at night. I've been camping many times since, and I've faced a lot of dangerous situations in my life, but I've never been that scared before or since. That night, out in the middle of nowhere, with only the dark forest around us, I felt a kind of terror I've never experienced before. I don't know what it was, and I don't think I ever will. All I know is that I was certain we were in real, imminent danger, and somehow we had made it out. That feeling stayed with me long after the weekend was over, and to this day, I can't shake the sense that we were being watched by something far more dangerous than we ever imagined. I had some time off and wanted to get away from everything. The kind of trip where you don't see another person for days. I picked a spot in north-central Pennsylvania that looked promising. There were barely any markings on the map, just Forest Service land and some old trails. The kind of place you could disappear into without anyone noticing. That was exactly what I was looking for. No cell service, no people, just silence. I packed everything I needed into my truck, including a decent topo map, and made sure I had my knife, a decent GPS, extra batteries, and a lot of food. I wanted to spend at least a few nights out there. I drove for hours on paved roads, then more than an hour on dirt Forest Service roads. These weren't casual gravel roads either. They were rutted, washed out in places, and clearly hadn't been maintained in years. Trees arched over the path, almost like a tunnel. I had to stop a couple times to clear branches or backtrack around washouts. Finally, I reached a small pull-off just wide enough to turn around in. That's where I parked. The trail I had in mind wasn't even marked anymore, just a faint line leading into the woods. I locked up, shouldered my pack, and started hiking. The trail was barely recognizable. If I hadn't known to look for the contour of the old path, I would have missed it entirely. It was overgrown with thick ferns and saplings, and spiderwebs caught across the trail every couple feet. I carried a stick in one hand just to sweep them out of the way. Every time I hit one, I felt that instinctual shiver crawl up my neck. Nobody had been here in a long time, There were no footprints, no signs of anything recent. Just animal tracks in the mud by the creek and the distant rustle of birds. The trail followed the creek through a valley. It was rocky and uneven, and I had to watch every step to avoid twisting an ankle. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, and the whole forest turned that soft gold color that only lasts for a little while. I wasn't in a rush, but I knew I needed to find a flat spot to camp before it got too dark. The terrain was steep and uneven, rocks and roots everywhere. Good spots were rare. After a while, I came to a fork in the creek. The main branch went on ahead, but a smaller one veered off to the right. Right at that fork was a flat spot, maybe 20 feet across, on the other side of the creek. It looked perfect. I could see a little clearing through the trees, but something about it didn't feel right. Even from a distance, I could see things scattered on the ground. It wasn't like someone had left a clean campsite. It looked like a place that had been abandoned in a hurry. I crossed the creek, stepping carefully on the slick rocks, and climbed up onto the flat. There was a tarp spread on the ground near a stone fire ring. Nearby was a thick log, maybe a foot in diameter, clearly chopped with an axe. It looked like someone had tried to split it but hadn't finished. The axe was gone. I walked a little farther and stopped. Everything you'd expect in someone's backpack was there: food packets, a cooking pot, a sleeping pad, a first aid kit. All of it just dumped on the ground like someone emptied their pack in a hurry. But the backpack itself wasn't there. Closer to the creek, I saw a pile of clothes. Pants, a shirt, socks, even a pair of boots, all soaked through and muddy, like they'd been sitting there through the rain, which I knew had hit the day before. A towel hung from a low branch like someone had tried to dry it out and never came back for it. There was an area not far from the fire ring that had clearly been used as a latrine. Dozens of small toilet paper piles behind a log, some fresh, some older. Whoever had been here, they'd been here for a while. A week, 2, but now they were just gone. I should have turned around right then. But the sun was already going down. I didn't want to hike 6 miles back on a barely visible trail in the dark. It was dangerous even in daylight. I told myself whoever had been here had probably gotten sick or injured and hiked out. Or maybe they got spooked by the rain and just left everything. People do dumb things in the woods all the time. I didn't like it, but I didn't have many options. I started setting up my tent on the far end of the flat, as far from the mess as I could. I kept looking around like I expected someone to step out of the trees at any moment. I had my 12-inch knife on my belt and eventually just took it out and kept it in my hand. I didn't make a fire. I ate cold food out of a pouch and drank from my water bottle. I didn't even unpack most of my gear, just the sleeping bag and pad. I wanted to be able to leave quickly if I needed to. That's when I found the cage. It was set back under some trees near the edge of the flat. I didn't notice it at first because it blended in with the brush. But when I walked over to get a better look around, I saw it. It was maybe 4 feet square, made out of saplings lashed together. Each corner was a vertical sapling, and they were connected at the top and bottom like the frame of a cube. Diagonal crossbars ran across each face, tied at the intersections with what looked like strips of bark or maybe old cord. It wasn't solid enough to hold anything. You could stick your arm right through the gaps. But it was clearly intentional. Somebody had built it carefully. I walked around it, staring at it, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't a hunting blind. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't strong enough for either. It looked like a cage but didn't function like one. It didn't even have a door or an opening. Just a box of lashed-together saplings. I looked at the ground around it and saw no signs of anything else. No burned offerings, no symbols, no trash. Just that strange wooden cube sitting in the forest. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in my tent with the knife in one hand, straining to hear through the nylon walls. Every creak, every snap of a twig sounded loud and close. The wind moved through the trees, and occasionally something would drop. A stick, a pine cone, and I jolt upright. Once I thought I heard something splash in the creek, but it could have been a raccoon or deer. I told myself that over and over, but my heart was racing. I kept picturing some ragged guy crawling out of the woods to get his stuff back. Or worse, someone who built that cage for a reason I didn't understand. Sometime around 3 a.m., I finally drifted into a light sleep, still gripping the knife. When the first gray light came through the trees, I was already up. I didn't even eat breakfast. I shoved everything back into my pack, rolled the tent without bothering to fold it properly, and crossed the creek again. I kept glancing over my shoulder the whole time. Nothing moved. The hike back felt longer. The forest felt different, like it was watching. I kept thinking I was hearing footsteps behind me, but when I stopped to listen, there was nothing, just wind in the leaves. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. Even then, I looked all around before unlocking the door. I called the Forest Service once I got home, told them what I saw, described everything. The tarp, the strewn gear, the latrine, the cage. I even sent them pictures I took with my phone. The ranger on the phone sounded interested but not alarmed. He said it was probably just someone living off the grid, maybe a pot grower or a hermit. Said they'd send someone out to check on it and clean it up. I never followed up to see what they found. I still think about that place. I know logically it was probably just someone who left in a hurry. Maybe they got hurt or scared and bailed out. But the cage, it sticks in my mind. It didn't make sense. There was no purpose for it that I could see. And the mess they left behind felt wrong. Like it wasn't just forgotten. Like it was abandoned mid-step. Something happened there. I haven't been back. I still camp, still hike, still go out into the middle of nowhere. But now, whenever I pick a spot, I think about that flat beside the creek and the wooden cube. I think about the feeling I had all night, lying awake with the knife in my hand. And I think about how sometimes the scariest thing in the woods isn't a bear or a storm. It's not knowing what someone else might have been doing out there, far away from anyone who could stop them. It was sometime in the fall, the kind of cold where your breath starts fogging up even when you're doing nothing but sitting still. We'd been out in the woods for maybe a week, part of a longer drill deep in some European forest, set up in a temporary camp far from any roads or real buildings. In English, I think it'd be called a forward outpost or something like that, but where I'm from, we just called it what it was: a muddy hole in the middle of nowhere with a few dugouts, some trenches, and a perimeter marked with barbed wire and trip flares. That night, me and my battle buddy had the graveyard shift, guard duty at what we called Checkpoint Charlie. We were both tired, the kind of tired that creeps into your bones and makes your hands shake even when you're just sitting. Our shift had started around midnight. By the time it hit 1 a.m., the forest was dead quiet. Not just regular quiet, silent. No wind, no branches swaying, not even the usual rustling sounds from small animals. Just that deep, heavy silence you get in thick woods when the cold locks everything in place. I was the one with the NVG first. Our issued ones weren't top tier, but they worked. A sort of grainy green world where shadows moved strange and everything looked a bit warped. You had to get used to it. I was scanning slowly from left to right along the perimeter, checking for movement. At first, I thought the night vision was glitching. There were shapes, 4 of them low to the ground, crawling. Real slow. At first I thought it might be an animal, maybe boars or something, but it wasn't that. They moved like people, flat on their stomachs, inching forward just inches at a time, heading toward the wire. I watched them for a few seconds, not really believing what I was seeing. For figures, human-shaped, definitely crawling. They were spaced out, maybe 5 or 10 meters apart from each other. No sound, just slow, deliberate movement. I passed the NVG to my buddy and asked him to look. He took one long look and his body stiffened. I didn't need him to say anything. He saw the same thing I did. We weren't briefed for anything like this. This drill wasn't supposed to have any activity tonight. No night maneuvers, no patrols, nothing. We were just supposed to man the checkpoints, watch the perimeter, and wait out our shift. I pulled out the radio and contacted our guard commander. Gave him a short, clear report for unidentified figures crawling toward our line. His reply was direct. No one was supposed to be out there. No exercises planned. No other squads on the move. He told us to keep watching and let him know if they got closer. So we did. I took back the NVG and kept eyes on them. They were still crawling. Not fast, not slow, just steady. A few more minutes passed. My heartbeat was speeding up. The cold didn't seem to matter anymore. The world outside that green circle in the night vision felt like it didn't exist. I watched the shapes getting closer to the edge of the tree line, maybe 70 meters out. Then I felt something shift inside me, like a gut instinct waking up after being asleep too long. I radioed back and told the commander I was going to make contact. He approved it, said to stay safe, follow protocol. I handed the NVG back to my buddy, loaded a round into my rifle, and climbed out of the trench. I stayed low and moved to the edge of the camp, right where the trees opened up into a narrow clearing. The night was pitch black. Without the goggles, I couldn't see anything beyond a few feet, but I knew where they were. I stopped just outside the wire, rifle raised, and called out a warning, loud, sharp, just like we'd been trained. I told them to stop, raise their hands, and identify themselves. My voice echoed strangely in the forest, bouncing off trees and dying somewhere in the distance. No reply, nothing moved. My buddy, still in the trench with the NVG, confirmed they were still there, still crawling. I repeated the warning. Still no reaction, no sound, no movement, just that same slow crawl. At this point, I wasn't thinking about it being a drill anymore. Something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, just wrong. Then I heard footsteps behind me, fast, heavy. Our guard commander was running down the trench line. He had his sidearm out and his own NVG on. He came up right next to me, looked out into the darkness through his goggles, and cursed under his breath. He saw them too. Without saying anything, he stepped past me and headed straight out toward the clearing. His boots crunched on frozen leaves. I kept my rifle up, eyes scanning the dark. He walked maybe 15 meters out, raised his voice, and yelled out another warning. Then he dropped into a half crouch and started running full speed toward the figures. I kept watching, waiting for him to reach them, but he didn't. He slowed down, stopped suddenly, then turned around with this look on his face I'll never forget. Confused, angry, scared. He looked straight at me, then back into the woods. There was nothing there. The shapes were gone. All four, just gone. I ran out to meet him, asked what he saw. He just shook his head, breathing hard. The ground was cold and undisturbed. No broken branches, no footprints, no drag marks. Just the quiet forest. My buddy back at the trench kept saying over the radio that they were just there. 1 second they were crawling forward, the next they were gone. Vanished. No movement, no scattering, no sudden sprint. Just not there anymore. We searched for maybe 30 minutes. Commander ordered a full sweep of the area. A couple other guys joined us, some half asleep, others shivering in the cold. We fanned out, kept our rifles up, moved in slow circles, checking everything. We didn't find anything. No signs of anyone. No gear, no clothing. Not even the usual crushed grass or disturbed soil you'd expect from someone crawling. It was like the forest just swallowed them whole. After the sweep, we regrouped and the commander told us to stay sharp and keep our mouths shut. We didn't report it up the chain. It would have been written off as a mistake. Maybe they would have accused us of seeing things, or maybe they'd think it was part of an exercise we weren't told about. Either way, we didn't push it. The rest of the night was long. I didn't sleep when we finally got off our shift. Just laid in my sleeping bag, staring at the dark canvas of the tent roof above me, listening to the faint rustle of the wind starting back up. In the morning, I went back out to where the shapes had been. In the daylight, it all looked so normal. Just trees, leaves, some frozen patches of dirt. But I still remembered how they moved, how they looked. Not in a way that I could describe clearly, but enough to know they were real. They weren't shadows or tricks of the light. They weren't animals. They weren't hallucinations. They moved like people, but they weren't people. I spent the rest of that deployment trying not to think about it. Tried to tell myself it was a mistake. Maybe some other squad that got lost or decided to test us. Maybe some locals messing around. But none of that made sense. Not how they moved, not how they vanished, not how absolutely silent they were. Nothing fit. Even now, years later, I still don't have an answer. Every once in a while, I'll be walking at night or sitting somewhere dark and I'll remember that feeling. That gut-deep knowledge that something was crawling toward us. Something with a purpose. Something that shouldn't have been there. I don't believe in ghosts or any of that. But I do believe in things that don't make sense. In people doing things they shouldn't. In things happening that leave no trace. That night was one of them. No matter how long I live, I know I'll never explain it. And I think that's what bothers me the most. Not that it happened, but that I'll never know who or what it was or what they were trying to do. That silence, that stillness, it stays with you. The first time I decided to take on the Colorado Trail in March 2008, it was a spur-of-the-moment decision. I'd been bike packing a bit around Colorado, just getting my feet wet with it, but nothing too serious. I wasn't new to camping by any means. I'd spent a lot of time outdoors, mostly in the summer, but this was different. This was mountain biking through the backcountry, all of it solo. The cold air of early spring in the Rockies was something I wasn't entirely familiar with, and it would end up showing me a side of the wilderness I didn't expect. I live in Littleton, which is a pretty populated city on the outskirts of Denver. But the moment you leave the city behind, the landscape changes drastically. It takes no more than 45 minutes to get to the trailhead, but it's as if you're suddenly in another world. I had this weird excitement in me that day, mostly because I had finally gotten my gear dialed in. I was using ultralight gear, backpacking equipment I'd been obsessing over for months, and I felt ready. I'd been to the trailhead several times before, but that day felt different. There was something in the air, something that made the whole experience feel like a grand adventure. March was always a bit tricky up there. Snow can hang on, especially in the higher elevations. But segment 1 of the Colorado Trail was mostly free of snow by mid-March, so I figured it was the perfect time to head out. I packed light, checked my gear a few times over, and made sure I had enough layers, food, and water to last me the night. I knew the trail well enough. There was Bear Creek, then some steady climbs, followed by some more technical stretches, but nothing too difficult. I'd done plenty of solo camping before, but this would be my first solo bikepacking trip. I rode out from my apartment, past the quiet suburban streets, and soon enough, I was deep in the woods. There's a serenity that comes with being out there alone, surrounded by towering pines, the smell of earth and pine needles mixing in the cool mountain air. I'd done a few short trips by this point, but nothing really long. This was the first time I'd really felt like I was pushing myself. I got a few miles in before I saw the first strange thing. A bike, leaning against a tree, just off the trail. It was a Trek, full suspension, the kind of bike someone would use to tackle the rugged terrain of the trail. I slowed down, curious, but didn't stop right away. I was still trying to get a feel for the trail, and stopping for too long was distracting. A few yards later, I heard the sound of sawing. A handsaw in the distance. My curiosity got the better of me, and I made my way towards the sound. When I came around a corner, I saw him. He was mid-50s, maybe older, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, sawing through a large, downed tree that blocked the trail. His bike, of course, was leaning against the same tree. The man looked up as I approached and gave me a warm smile. "Hey there," he said. "I'm just clearing this trail. Been riding it for decades. Come up every spring to do a little maintenance." I smiled back. He seemed friendly, like an old-school mountain biker who had seen it all. We talked for a few minutes. He was genuinely interested in my journey, asking about my gear, my trip, and where I was headed. Looking back now, I realized that I gave him way more information than I should have. I told him I was solo, that I was new to the Colorado Trail, that I wasn't carrying anything for protection. I even told him where I was planning to camp that night. This was a bad move, but at the time I didn't see it. He seemed harmless, after all. After we finished clearing the tree, he gave me directions to a campsite he recommended about half a mile up the trail. "Great spot," he said. "Sheltered from the wind by cliffs and with a killer view of Waterton Canyon. There's a fire pit there, too. You'll like it." He seemed really excited about the spot, so I figured it couldn't hurt to check it out. I followed his directions, and sure enough, after about 10 minutes of riding, I found the site. It was perfect, secluded, calm, the kind of peaceful spot I was looking for. I pitched my tent, set up a small fire, and settled in for the night. The fire crackled as I cooked a dehydrated meal, followed by a treat of cherry cobbler. I had a small bowl, sat back, and let the quiet of the night wash over me. It was the kind of serenity that only the mountains can provide. Once I had everything cleaned up, I crawled into my tent, tucked myself into my sleeping bag, and fell asleep. Or I tried to. It wasn't long before something woke me up, and when I say it woke me up, I mean I was jerked from a dead sleep like someone slapped me awake. My heart raced. My mind was instantly alert. The kind of fear that runs through your veins at 3 a.m. when everything is still and silent hits differently in the woods. I lay there for a few moments, straining to hear something, anything. I could feel the hairs on my neck standing up, but when I reached for my headlamp, I found nothing. Nothing at all. I got up, slipped on my clothes, grabbed my bare mason knife, and stepped outside into the cold night. There was nothing. No sounds. No movement. Just stillness. It was unnerving. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Maybe I had just dreamed it. I thought. Maybe it was nothing, but it felt too real. I pulled the pin on my personal jogging alarm, the one that screams at 130 decibels when triggered. I figured if there was anything out there, I'd scare it away. The alarm went off, and the sound was deafening in the quiet of the forest. The silence returned, but something else was different. I can't explain it, but it was like a wave of fear crashed over me, hitting me hard, making me freeze. I've been camping alone enough to know the feeling when something's wrong, and this was one of those times. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone, or something, was watching me. It wasn't rational, but it was so strong that I could feel it in my bones. The thought of packing up and leaving right then crossed my mind, but I couldn't just throw everything together and leave. It would take me at least 20 minutes to pack everything up and get on my bike, and I'd have to get everything just right, or I'd throw off my balance. That 20 minutes felt like an eternity, with every rustle of the wind, every shadow seeming to carry a threat. Finally, I packed up and got on my bike. It was dark now and the trail was steep. The first part of the ride was downhill, and I tried to push myself as much as I could. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me. I kept hearing twigs snap, and I swear I could hear footsteps just off the trail. The hair on the back of my neck stood up again. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just a bear. I reached the steep incline that led up to Lenny's Rest, a place where I could catch my breath before the final stretch. I slowed to a stop and grabbed my bike, trying to calm my nerves. But then I heard it, something running uphill towards me, fast, something large, crashing through the forest like it was coming straight for me. My heart dropped into my stomach. I didn't stop to think. I slammed my bike into gear and took off, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. I had no choice. My mind was running on pure instinct, and everything inside me screamed that I needed to get away. The trail ahead was steep, winding with sharp switchbacks, but I didn't care. I was flying. Every nerve in my body was focused on getting away. The sound of the creature following me was still there, but I was too far ahead now. I reached the final stretch, the smooth downhill section of the trail, and I pushed my bike as fast as I could, carving the turns with precision. I didn't look back. I just focused on the trail ahead, my body moving on autopilot. It wasn't until I reached Wadsworth Boulevard, miles away from where I started, that I finally slowed down. My chest was tight with fear, my heart pounding in my ears, but I was safe. I made it. I'd outrun whatever it was that had been stalking me through the night. That was the last time I camped alone in that section of the Colorado Trail. I've heard many stories of strange encounters in the woods, and while I can't say for sure what happened that night, I know this. Whatever it wasn't a bear, and it wasn't anything that should have been out there. I don't think I'll ever know exactly what it was, but I do know this: humans are the most dangerous animals in the woods. And that night, I learned that the hard way. We had been in the Santa Barbara backcountry for 3 days, camping in a secluded spot far off the trail. It wasn't an easy hike. A good 10 miles in from the trailhead, where the terrain got rougher, and the trail less distinct. There were just 3 of us, my friends Mark and Greg and me. We'd all been camping together before, but this was the first time we'd ventured so deep into the mountains. We had planned the trip for months, and though it was a challenge, we'd all been looking forward to it. The first 2 days had been pretty standard. Hiking, setting up camp, eating too much freeze-dried food, and talking about life. But as the 3rd morning arrived, things began to feel different. It was the last day of the trip, and we were just packing up camp, trying to make sure we had everything before heading out. The weather was perfect, clear skies, the air still, the sun just starting to rise high enough to warm the cool morning air. The only sound was the crackling of the dying embers in the fire pit and the distant chirping of birds. We hadn't seen anyone else around for the entire trip. That's one of the things we liked about this spot. It was far enough in that you rarely bumped into anyone else. It was one of those places that felt like it belonged to you and you alone. A place to be alone with nature, away from the crowds. That morning, as we were making breakfast, I heard something strange. At first, I thought it was just the usual morning sounds of the forest. Some rustling in the trees or the soft whoosh of the wind, but it was different. It was a noise that didn't quite match the usual rhythm of the forest. I turned to Greg and Mark, both of whom were stirring their coffee, and nodded toward the hillside above us. I could hear voices, faint at first, carried by the wind. I wasn't sure if they were real or just my imagination, but it was unsettling. I strained to listen, and sure enough, I could hear the murmur of voices coming from up above, somewhere on the hillside. At first, I thought it was just a couple of hikers coming down the trail, but there was something off about it. The voices didn't seem to be getting any closer. They weren't getting louder either, which struck me as odd. You'd expect them to get closer as whoever was talking made their way down the trail. But no, the voices stayed just as distant, echoing faintly through the trees. As I stood there listening, I realized something even stranger. They weren't coming down the trail at all. They were on the hillside above us, and the conversation felt like it was directed at us. Too casual to be hikers, too deliberate, like they knew we were here and they were watching us. I don't think I was the only one who felt the weirdness of the situation. Mark stopped stirring his coffee, his eyes narrowing as he listened too. Greg was still focused on his gear, unaware of what was going on around him, but something about the tension in the air made me uncomfortable. We kept packing up, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't help but feel like we were being watched. I didn't want to make any assumptions, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt like those voices had been there longer than we realized, maybe even longer than we had been awake. We were so deep in the backcountry, there wasn't supposed to be anyone around. After an hour or so, we finally saw them. 2 men appeared from the trees above, walking down the trail toward our camp. The sight of them was almost a relief. Finally, human contact. But then I noticed something off about them too. They were both middle-aged, with rough, weathered faces, carrying rifles and big, heavy backpacks. The first man was short and stocky, with a thick beard, while the second was tall and thin, his face pale under the shadow of a baseball cap. They didn't seem like hikers at all. There was something about their presence that felt strange, like they didn't belong in the wilderness in the same way we did. They walked with a deliberate slowness, and their eyes scanned the camp, taking everything in. The stocky one was the first to speak. He didn't offer a greeting or even an acknowledgement of our presence. Instead, he asked in a gruff voice, "So, what kind of weed you guys smoking?" Caught me off guard. I wasn't sure how to respond, and for a second, I thought maybe I misheard him. I glanced at Greg, who just shrugged and tried to laugh it off. "Oh, just some swag," Greg said, trying to make light of it. "We just finished it off." Without a pause, the stocky man reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small pipe, grinning as he said, "Well, we'll just have to smoke mine then." He handed the pipe to Greg, who, after a moment of hesitation, took a hit, then passed it to Mark. Mark took a hit too, but when it came to me, I refused. I don't know why. I wasn't in the mood, or maybe it just didn't sit right with me, but I said, "Nah, I don't smoke." The stocky man didn't seem to mind. He just nodded and tossed the pipe back into his pocket. But then, in a move that felt strangely possessive, He asked me to hold his backpack. It wasn't a polite request, it was more of an order, like he expected me to do it. He slung it off his back and threw it at me without any warning, the weight of it surprising me as it landed on my hands. The backpack was heavy. I hadn't expected it to be so heavy, and as I looked down, I saw that there were antlers sticking out of the top of the bag. Blood dripped down the side. I had no idea what kind of deer it was, but it was clear they had butchered it in the backcountry. It smelled like raw meat, and I felt a knot in my stomach. "How much do you think that weighs?" the stocky man asked, his eyes fixed on me. I looked down at the backpack, trying to judge its weight. "Maybe 35, 40 pounds?" I said. "Dead on," he replied, sounding pleased. "We butchered it up there. Got ourselves some meat to bring back. Good hunting." He nodded toward the antlers, as if to validate his pride in the kill. By now, Keith, the taller and quieter man, had said nothing. He was still standing a little off to the side, just watching, his face unreadable. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't want to seem rude. The whole situation just felt weird. These guys weren't out here for the same reasons we were. They weren't here to enjoy the wilderness. They were here for something else entirely, something I couldn't put my finger on. The stocky man introduced himself as Ralph and gestured toward Keith, who finally spoke. "Keith," he said in a low voice, offering a brief nod. They went on to explain they were childhood friends from Santa Barbara. Every year, they met up for a hunting trip in this area. Keith was married to a district attorney in Santa Barbara, while Ralph lived up near Yosemite, inspecting power lines through the mountains. It all sounded like a bit of a strange life, but they seemed comfortable with it. Ralph and Keith stayed for a while, talking to us about their hunting trips and their lives. They weren't unfriendly, just odd. As the conversation continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about them. They were friendly, sure, but their presence seemed invasive, and the way they watched us, it was like they were trying to gauge something, sizing us up in a way I didn't quite understand. I didn't know if it was just their demeanor, or if it was the isolation of the place, but something in my gut told me that I needed to stay alert. Eventually, Ralph and Keith left, heading back up the trail the way they came. They didn't wave or say goodbye. They just turned around and began walking, disappearing into the trees. We watched them go, and for a while, none of us spoke. We packed up the rest of our gear in silence, the weight of the encounter hanging in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Maybe it was the way they appeared out of nowhere, or how they seemed to know we were there before we even saw them, but I had the distinct impression that we had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. We finished packing up, and as we started the long hike back to the trailhead, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder a few times, half expecting to see Ralph and Keith following us, or maybe just watching from the trees. But there was nothing, just the rustling of leaves in the breeze and the soft crunch of our boots on the trail. As we made our way back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly avoided something much worse. We didn't talk about it much, but as we neared the trailhead, I could see the tension in Mark and Greg's faces. We'd all felt it, the weirdness, the strange encounter, and it wasn't something that was easy to brush off. We made it back to the car without any further incident. I didn't feel particularly relieved, but I was glad to be leaving the backcountry behind. I still don't know what those men were up to, but in the end, I think I made the right call by refusing their offer to smoke. Some people you just don't trust, no matter how friendly they seem at first. I've been back to that part of the mountains a few times since then, but I always keep my distance from the areas where we met Ralph and Keith. I don't know if they meant us harm, but I didn't stick around to find out. Something in my gut tells me that we were lucky to get out of there unscathed. And maybe that's the scariest thing of all, that sometimes you don't know just how close you are to something much worse. We'd had the cabin for years. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old single-wide mobile home parked on a clearing in the deep woods of northern Michigan. The kind of place people drove past without even realizing it was there. My parents bought it when I was a kid. It didn't have running water, and the power was a pain to deal with since it was wired through an outdoor electrical box that needed to be manually flipped on each visit. Still, it was our family's spot. Isolated, quiet, peaceful until recently. Over the past year or two, strange things had started happening up there. Nothing dramatic at first, just little things that were easy to shrug off. Stuff would be moved around or missing altogether, even though no one had visited in weeks. Sometimes, it felt like the door latch had been forced or a window looked like it had been opened and closed again without anyone mentioning it. At first, my family just thought it was animals or maybe a trespasser. Someone from town who found it and used it as a party spot when we weren't around. My dad put a new padlock on the front and back doors, and we started checking everything more carefully when we left. But then the police had to come out. My uncle had gone up there one weekend and found the inside totally torn apart. Nothing stolen, but furniture knocked over, drawers open, blankets and clothes thrown around like someone had gone through everything in a rush. No signs of forced entry. No footprints that he could see. The sheriff walked around the place and told us maybe it was a bear or a raccoon or a porcupine looking for shelter. But it didn't sit right. We stopped using the cabin for a while after that. Still, I hadn't been back since all that happened, and I wanted to prove to myself it was nothing. Just someone messing around, maybe kids or drunks or whatever. I told my friend, we were both in our late 20s, that we could go up there together, just for a weekend. I didn't want to go alone, and she was always up for a weird adventure. We left after work on a Friday, stopping for gas and snacks along the way, and didn't pull off the Forest Service Road until almost 9 p.m. The drive-in was pitch black. The moon was hiding behind clouds, and the road was just dirt and gravel with tall pine trees pressed in close on either side. I kept the headlights on high beam the whole time, creeping slowly around the familiar bends. The path up to the cabin wasn't marked, and I almost missed it. The turnoff was so narrow and overgrown it barely looked like a road anymore. The cabin, or mobile home, really was still standing when we pulled up. No lights, obviously, just the shape of it outlined in the headlights and the faint reflection of the metal siding in the dark. The porch light had long since stopped working, and the door looked the same as always, paint peeling, lock a little rusty. I parked the car right up close, so the headlights would give us some visibility as we unloaded. The air was freezing. It was mid-autumn, the kind of cold that seeps into your sleeves and makes your fingers go numb fast. We moved quickly, grabbing our backpacks, a bag of food, and a flashlight. The plan was simple. Unlock the electrical box on the back side of the cabin, flip the power on, and get the inside warmed up with the little space heater. I had done it a dozen times before. Should have been easy, but the padlock on the electrical box was frozen solid. I tried breathing on it, then jiggling it, then hitting it with the side of the flashlight. My fingers were stinging with cold, and the lock wouldn't budge. My friend held the flashlight steady while I worked at it, her breath forming clouds in the air. We were both cold, tired, and increasingly annoyed. But then we started hearing things. At first, it was subtle, a shuffle, like footsteps on leaves, then a faint snap, like a branch breaking. Every time I stopped moving and held still, it went quiet. When I started jiggling the lock again, it came back. It sounded like something, or someone, was moving around the perimeter of the cabin. Not close, not at first, but getting closer. We didn't say anything. We just glanced at each other in the beam of the flashlight, both of us trying not to let the other know we were spooked. I tried the lock one more time. Nothing. It wasn't going to open without something to thaw it out. Then there was a noise, louder this time, just off to the left, maybe 10 or 15 feet from us. Not an animal noise, not a deer or a raccoon. It sounded like a foot dragging in the gravel just once. That was it. We both darted up the steps, unlocked the front door, and went inside. The inside of the cabin was freezing cold and pitch dark. We used our flashlights to check every room. Everything looked the same. Furniture dusty, curtains drawn, little cobwebs in the corners. I kept expecting something to be different, some sign that someone had been there, but there was nothing. It was dead quiet. We sat on the old couch with our jackets still on, just trying to warm up. I told her we'd get a motel in town and come back after the sun came up to deal with the lock and the power. We weren't going to sleep in a freezing, powerless trailer in the middle of nowhere, especially not with someone or something lurking around outside. We grabbed a couple more things, made sure the door was locked, and rushed back to the car. I got into the driver's seat, tossed the backpack in the back, and turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. Not just no engine noise, nothing. No dash lights, no sounds, no clicks. I tried again. Still nothing. The dome light didn't even come on when I opened the door. I hit the lock button out of instinct. Nothing happened. The doors didn't lock. The car was completely dead. My stomach dropped. I looked at her, and she looked at me, and we both knew something wasn't right. This wasn't a random dead battery. This was something else. The car had been totally fine just minutes ago. We had driven it all the way there. There was no warning, no flickering lights, no sputtering. And now it was a brick. We got out and went back to the cabin. Fast. I locked the door behind us and double-checked every window. The whole place felt different now. The cold wasn't just cold, it felt threatening. Like we weren't alone. We were miles from town, in a dead car, in a powerless trailer with no way to call for help. Our phones showed no service, not even one bar. We tried to stay calm. We talked in low voices, sitting close together on the couch, bundled in our sleeping bags, trying to think through our options. We just waited out, we decided. First light, we'd pack what we could carry and walk toward the main road until we got signal or found help. We had enough snacks, a few bottles of water, and layers of clothes. It would be fine. It had to be, but it didn't feel fine. We heard the first knock maybe an hour later. 2 sharp, deliberate knocks on the back door. Not the wind, not an animal. It was the sound of someone using their knuckles and hitting the metal door twice. We froze. Neither of us moved. We just sat there in total silence, our heads turned toward the back of the trailer. Nothing followed. No more knocks, no footsteps, no voices, just silence again. But the worst part was knowing someone was out there, that they had waited until we were quiet to do it, that they wanted us to know they were there. Time passed. I don't know how long. We whispered a few things back and forth, mostly plans. Stay quiet, don't make noise, keep the flashlight ready. Then something hit the window on the side of the trailer. One loud smack, like a palm or fist slapping the glass. We didn't move. The sound echoed in my ears. The whole trailer creaked a little, reacting to the vibration. The glass didn't break, but it had been hard enough to rattle the frame. Still, no one tried to come in. No voices, no more knocks, just quiet again. We stayed huddled on the couch, not moving, barely breathing. Kept happening. Every 20 minutes or so, just when we started thinking maybe it was over, there would be another knock. A different window each time. Sometimes it was light, just enough to make noise. Other times it was louder, like a fist hitting harder. Never a rhythm, never a pattern, just randomness. Enough to keep us on edge, never able to sleep, never able to relax. We didn't turn on the flashlight anymore. We just sat in the dark, watching the windows, listening. I could feel every creak in the old trailer, every shift in the wind. I imagined shapes moving outside, but I didn't look. I didn't want to see anything. I just wanted morning to come. It was the longest night of my life. The darkness stretched on forever. Every time I thought it might be close to dawn, I'd peek at the tiny glow in the dark hands on my watch and realize only minutes had passed. Hours dragged by like days. My legs went numb from sitting still so long. My ears rang from the constant tension. My mind raced with possibilities, who it was, what they wanted, why they hadn't just broken in. Eventually, the sky started to lighten. The deep black of the forest turned to a dull gray blue. The windows glowed faintly, just enough to see the outlines of trees outside. No more knocks came, no more sounds. We waited until the sun was fully up before we moved. I stepped out first. The cold air hit me like a wall, and the frost on the ground crunched under my boots. I looked around. Nothing. No foot. I needed a break from everything. Work, my phone, people. I just wanted to disappear into the woods for a few days and reset. So I packed up my gear, loaded up the cooler with basic stuff, trail mix, jerky, water, a couple of MREs, and a small camping stove. and drove 4 hours to a remote section of forest I'd marked on a map months ago. It wasn't a real campground, just a stretch of public land with no cell service, no facilities, and no trails. Exactly what I was looking for. I parked my car just off a gravel access road, locked it, and hiked in about 2 miles, veering off any clear paths until I found a small clearing beside a creek. It wasn't big, just enough room to pitch my small tent, but it was quiet. The creek bubbled a little down a slope. The trees were tight and tall. The air was clean and still. I set up my tent around 3 p.m., just as the sun was starting to lean west. I laid out my sleeping pad, zipped my bag inside the tent, and walked a few hundred feet to collect some dry sticks and kindling. Even though I brought the stove, I figured I'd make a small fire later. For the rest of the evening, I read a bit from the paperback I brought and sat with my back against a tree, just listening to the woods breathe. As it got darker, the woods came alive in a different way. Frogs near the creek, occasional rustling high in the trees, maybe a raccoon skittering around. I've camped enough to know what's normal and what's not. These sounds were normal. It was peaceful. I cooked some food on the little stove, ate slowly, then buried the trash in a hole away from camp. Just after sunset, I put out the fire I had going. I didn't want to be one of those people who started a forest fire by being careless. Besides, I was tired. Hiking in had worn me out, and the quiet was making me sleepy. I got into my tent, zipped it up, and settled in with the sounds of crickets and creek water lulling me to sleep. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of something crunching in the woods. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer. It wasn't stomping around, but it was definitely heavy. More than a raccoon or fox. The steps were slow, steady, coming from uphill behind my tent. I laid completely still, eyes wide open, heart thumping hard in my ears. I've had deer wander close before, so I didn't panic. I waited for the sound to move off, but it didn't. It stopped, just outside my tent, maybe 10 or 15 feet away. There was no sniffing, no chewing, no hooves clacking together, just silence. I didn't move. My breathing had slowed, automatically, like my body knew better than to make a sound. Then I heard a soft crunch, then another, then nothing. It was moving away, or so I thought. I stayed awake for another hour, listening, barely blinking, before finally passing out from exhaustion. When I got up the next morning, the woods were still. There was no sign of anything unusual. I walked the perimeter of my camp, looking for tracks, and I found some boot prints, not animal tracks. Big ones, too. They came down from the hill, paused behind my tent, then wandered off to the left, into the thicker part of the forest. I didn't panic, but it definitely shook me. It meant someone else was out here. No one was supposed to be out this far. It wasn't hunting season. There weren't trails or signs of logging nearby. The prints weren't mine. I was wearing smaller boots with a different sole pattern. This person had been out here during the night, close enough to touch my tent. I considered leaving, but I told myself maybe it was just another camper, passing through. Maybe they didn't see my tent until they were close. Maybe they were as startled as I was. I gathered my things and moved camp anyway, another mile deeper, closer to the creek. I didn't want to make myself easy to find. I stayed low, kept quiet, didn't light a fire that night. That evening, I ate cold food, kept my tent zipped up, and sat inside reading until the sun went down. I didn't hear anything unusual until maybe midnight. That's when I noticed the smell, something like sweat and soil. It wasn't animal musk. It was too sharp, too strong. I sat up, listening hard, heart pounding. I turned off my headlamp. The forest outside was pitch black. There was no wind, no bugs, just dead quiet. That kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. Then I heard breathing. It wasn't loud, but it was there. Low, steady, human breathing, right outside my tent. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't even blink. The breathing went on for maybe 20 seconds. 20 seconds that felt like hours before I heard footsteps moving away. Not crashing or running, just steady steps, crunching on dry leaves, fading into the woods. I stayed awake the rest of the night, clutching my hatchet and knife, my chest tight with fear. When dawn broke, I got out and checked around again. More footprints. The same tread pattern. Same direction. Someone had followed me. They didn't try to talk, didn't announce themselves. Just stood there, watching, breathing. I decided that was it. I was done. I packed up quickly and began hiking back to my car. But as I followed the GPS app on my offline map, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. I wasn't where I thought I was. Somehow, I'd gone in the wrong direction the day before. I had moved deeper, not closer to the road. I kept walking, trying to find my bearings. The sun was already high by mid-morning, and I was sweating hard. The woods felt thicker, darker. My nerves were shot. Every twig that snapped in the distance made me jump. About 2 hours later, I found something that made my blood run cold. Another campsite, abandoned, but not old. There was a tarp, faded blue, tied between trees. A small pile of ash from a fire pit. Empty cans of food scattered around. A water bottle, dirty and half full. A wool blanket rolled up neatly near a tree. No tent, no sleeping bag, no gear like mine. Just basic stuff like someone had been squatting here off and on. It was maybe a day or two old. No sign of who had been staying there. I checked the area. Same boot prints, same tread. Whoever had been watching me was staying out here. I didn't touch anything. I moved quickly but quietly, trying not to attract attention. My map told me the creek would eventually curve back toward the road if I followed it downstream. I decided to trust it. The woods felt even heavier now. I didn't stop to eat. I didn't stop to rest. I drank water on the move and kept glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. That's when I noticed something ahead of me on the creek bed. A deer carcass, or what was left of one. It had been torn apart. Not eaten clean by scavengers, this was rough, messy. The ribs were cracked open, the back legs missing, fur and blood dried into the soil. But there were no drag marks. It had been killed there. I looked around, half expecting to see a bear. But there were no prints, no claw marks, just the same human boot prints in the soft mud nearby. I moved fast after that. I hiked for hours, only stopping once to refill my water bottle from the creek. I didn't hear anything behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being followed. Every time I looked behind me, the woods looked normal but wrong. Still, too still. It was late afternoon when I finally recognized the road through the trees. I stumbled out of the forest, legs shaking, clothes soaked in sweat. My car was still there, untouched. I almost didn't believe it. As I unlocked it and threw my gear into the back, I noticed something on the driver's side window. Smudges. Greasy, dirty smears. Like someone had pressed their fingers and face to the glass. Not clear, but enough to make my skin crawl. I got in, locked the doors, and drove off without even taking off my boots. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. I didn't report it. I didn't know what to report. Nothing happened, technically. No one spoke to me. No one threatened me. But I've never been that scared before. For weeks after, I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone following me. I had nightmares about that breathing. I didn't go camping again for almost a year. When I did, I made sure it was with other people. I never went back to that section of woods. I never tried to find that spot again. And I never will. Someone out there didn't want company. I gave them what they wanted. I left, and I don't ever plan on going back. I was camping in a valley by myself, far out where there was no cell service. It was one of those places you stumble across by accident. A narrow dirt road peeling off a forgotten highway, winding its way down through pine-covered slopes and then opening into this wide, peaceful basin. A river cut through it, slow and clear, and the place felt untouched. No formal sites, no bathrooms, nothing. Just nature. I had a printed map in my glove box and a couple pins saved on my GPS, but the signal had died hours before I parked. I figured I could get away for a few nights, drink a few beers, relax. That first evening, I hiked a trail a little too long. I meant to be back by sunset, but misjudged the length and found myself coming back down the ridge as the light was really starting to go. The forest turned that deep purple blue, and every tree cast these long shadows that moved if you looked too long. I wasn't scared exactly, but I was alert. Everything feels closer in the woods after dusk. About halfway down the trail, I ran into a guy coming up. He looked local, maybe mid-50s, leathery skin, ball cap, long strides like the terrain was nothing to him. He didn't look like a threat. We chatted a bit. I told him I was camping in the valley, and he seemed to think that was cool, even said he knew a better spot than the one I had picked. Said it was closer to the road and water, but tucked away so no one would see me. He pointed it out on the path, just off a side trail that led down to the river. It looked promising. A little alcove with enough flat ground for a fire pit and a tent. The water wasn't far, but you couldn't hear the road even though it was maybe 300 yards up a small incline. I took his advice and thanked him, and he just nodded and kept heading up the trail. Never saw him again. By then it was dark. Not just fading light, it was black. I only had the light from my headlamp and the fire once I got it going. I cracked a beer, tossed a couple logs on, and sat back in my camp chair with my friend's comedy podcast playing through a Bluetooth speaker. I was probably louder than I should have been, laughing along with the jokes, cooking some sausages over the fire, tossing beer cans in a plastic bag. My truck was parked close, and I had a tent ready to go, but being honest, I was feeling too lazy to set it up. Instead, I just threw out my sleeping pad in the bed of the truck, under the topper next to all my gear. It felt safer somehow, like the hard shell and high clearance gave me an extra layer against whatever might be out there. I woke up early the next morning, just after dawn. It was cold, and the valley still had that heavy mist clinging to the grass. I stretched, climbed out of the truck, and got the fire going again with what was left in my kindling pile. My hands shook a little from the chill, so I cracked another beer, half as breakfast, half as motivation. I pulled out the skillet and started prepping some eggs and bacon. The sound of the river was nice, gentle, and steady. Birds were waking up. It was one of those mornings where the stillness feels earned. That's when I noticed him. There was a man standing at the edge of my camp, just at the tree line. He hadn't made a sound, hadn't said a word. He wasn't facing me directly, just kind of standing there, head tilted slightly down, body pointed off to the left. At first, I thought maybe it was another camper or maybe even the local guy from the night before, but something felt off immediately. His clothes were filthy, layers and layers of shirts and jackets, all too big, sagging off him. And the plastic. He had plastic grocery bags tied all over himself, some hanging from his sleeves, others knotted around his waist, dangling like weird tassels. His beard was long, gray and brown, unkempt, almost matted in places. His eyes never met mine. He just stood there. I tried to act normal, said something about how nice the morning was, thinking maybe he was just a little off or maybe deaf. No reaction. I gestured to the fire, said he could have some breakfast if he wanted. Nothing. He didn't step closer, but he didn't move away either. He just sort of slowly paced along the perimeter of my sight, never crossing an invisible line that separated me from him. I watched him carefully. He wasn't talking to himself or anything, but the way he moved made my skin crawl. He'd shuffle a few steps, stop, turn his back to me, then shift again. His head would twitch slightly, like he was listening hard but didn't want me to know. I offered him a beer, figuring maybe that would help break whatever weird spell was happening. He didn't even glance at it, just turned a little and walked to another edge of the camp, still not looking at me. By now, the eggs were burning and my beer tasted sour. Something was wrong, deep wrong. It hit me that I had no cell service, no way to call anyone. No one even knew exactly where I was. If I hadn't run into that local, I wouldn't even be in this exact spot. I slowly reached down and made sure my bear spray was in the side pocket of my camp chair. My buck knife was already clipped on my belt, but I unfastened the snap to free it. My heart was thudding so loud I was sure he could hear it. He was just standing there again, back turned to me, a few yards from where I'd parked my truck. I waited. I thought maybe he'd leave, just wander off, but he didn't, and I knew that as long as he stood there, that whole valley had changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore, felt like a trap. I stood up, slowly but firmly, and told him, in the kind of voice you use when you're dead serious, that he needed to either acknowledge me or leave. Right then. No more pretending I wasn't there. No more silent circling. No more creeping. He didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't do anything. So I took a few steps forward and pulled the bear spray out, keeping it low by my side but ready. I stepped on a twig and that finally got a reaction. His shoulder tensed. His body sagged a little like a balloon losing air. Then, without a word, he shuffled away. Not fast, but not slow either. Just turned and walked back into the woods the way he must have come. I stood there for a long time after he was gone, listening, watching, trying to see if he circled back. But there was nothing. Just the quiet of the woods, the soft lap of the river, the wind brushing through the pines like nothing had happened. I didn't waste any time. I doused the fire, packed my skillet and chair, threw all my gear into the truck without even organizing it. I slammed the topper shut and jumped in the cab, locking the doors before I even started the engine. I kept checking the rearview mirror the whole way out of that valley. Every bend in the dirt road made me tighten my grip on the wheel. Every tree felt like it was hiding something. I didn't breathe easy until I was back on pavement, with bars on my phone and signs of life around me. The whole drive home, I kept thinking about the night before, how loud I had been, how visible, the fire, the music, the laughter. I had made myself a beacon out there. If that man had been watching, if he had seen the fire from wherever he was sleeping, I had made myself the easiest target in miles. And I keep wondering, how long had he been there? Did he see me arrive? Was he close by all night while I slept in my truck, totally unaware? I think about how I almost pitched my tent, how I almost laid down with just a layer of nylon between me and the woods. But I didn't. I stayed in the truck out of laziness or maybe instinct, and that probably made all the difference. I haven't camped alone since then. I tell people it was because of work or that I'm just too busy, but really it's that image I can't shake. A man with a beard and 100 plastic bags, pacing the edge of my camp without a word, like he was trying to decide something I didn't want to find out. Some people go their whole lives without realizing how thin the line is between safety and danger. That morning, standing there with the fire crackling and a beer in my hand, I saw the line clearly, and I saw how fast it can shift. Next time I go camping, it won't be alone, and I won't be so easy to find. I wasn't really close with my cousin Jacob growing up, but that summer we kind of bonded over the idea of doing something different. He had just moved back to the state and was living with his parents again while he saved money. I had just finished a stressful job contract and needed to clear my head. We weren't kids anymore, both in our late 20s, and I guess the idea of heading out to the woods felt like a return to something simpler. Something quiet. No phones, no people, just space to breathe. Jacob knew a guy who had a cabin, more like a shack, really, deep in the forests of northern Minnesota. It was technically on private property but hadn't been lived in for years. The guy said we could stay for a few nights, no problem, so long as we didn't break anything. There was no electricity, no plumbing, not even cell service. Just a roof, 4 walls, and a wood stove. Sounded perfect. We packed light, some canned food, a little camp stove, water jugs, sleeping bags, flashlights, and layers of clothes. It was early fall, the kind of season where the mornings sting with cold, but the days are warm if the sun is out. The trees were halfway through their color change, golds and reds all over the hills. The trail to the cabin wasn't marked, and we had to park the truck off a gravel road and hike about 2 miles in. The first mile was easy, just a path winding through tall birch and pine. After that, it got denser, more overgrown. You could tell no one came back there often. We had to push through tall grass, duck under low-hanging branches, and at one point we crossed a shallow creek by balancing on a mossy log. Eventually we saw the cabin through the trees. It was small and crooked, with a patched metal roof and a rusted chimney pipe sticking out at an angle. A few old tools leaned against the porch, left to rot. Inside, it was dark and smelled like old wood and damp fabric. But it was dry. The windows were dirty but intact, and the little wood stove in the corner looked solid. There was even a rickety table and 2 chairs. Mice had chewed through a few corners, but we didn't mind. We swept out some of the dirt, rolled out our sleeping bags on the wooden floor, and made ourselves at home. That first night was calm. We cooked beans and rice on the camp stove, played cards by headlamp, then turned in early. I remember lying there in my sleeping bag, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. You could hear everything out there. Branches creaking, wind pushing through the trees, a distant owl, maybe coyotes far off. But it didn't bother me. If anything, it made me feel far away from the noise and nonsense of normal life. I slept better than I had in weeks. The second day we hiked around the area, looking for old deer trails and checking out a beaver pond Jacob remembered from a hunting trip years ago. We didn't see any people, not even tire tracks or beer cans. It really did feel like we had the whole forest to ourselves. That night we built a small fire in the clearing behind the cabin, just enough for warmth. We talked about life, drank a little whiskey, and watched the stars come out. Around midnight, we let the fire die down and went inside. Again, nothing strange, just peaceful silence. It was the third day when things started to feel off. We decided to hike farther that morning, try to find a ridge Jacob said had a view of the lake to the north. We packed lunch, brought the map, and started walking. The trail was faint but still visible, with marks where deer had worn down the ground. The trees were thicker the farther we went, like they'd been untouched for decades. Around noon, we stopped to eat near a rock outcrop. The view was amazing, rolling hills of color, no signs of roads or buildings, just endless forest. On the way back, we noticed something weird. It was a tree, an old pine that had clearly been cut recently. Not fallen from age, but cut, clean through. The bark around the base was chipped, and there were fresh marks in the trunk. But there were no signs of chainsaw work, no smell of gas or oil. It looked like someone had used an axe, maybe even a handsaw. The stump was white and fresh, not weathered. We stood there for a minute, just looking at it. Then we kept walking. About 50 yards down the trail, I spotted something else. A pile of rocks. Not a natural pile, but stacked deliberately, like a marker or a cairn. It wasn't there before. I would have seen it. I remember thinking maybe we passed it and didn't notice, but it didn't feel right. The stones were round and smooth, like they'd come from the creek, and there was a feather stuck in the top one. Not tied, just jammed into a crack. Jacob didn't say anything, but I could tell he saw it too. We just kept walking. By the time we got back to the cabin, the sun was starting to dip low. I lit the camp stove and started heating dinner while Jacob went out back to chop some more wood. It was quiet, but I kept glancing at the window. That uneasy feeling hadn't gone away. The forest, which had felt open and welcoming before, now felt like it was watching us. After we ate, we stayed inside. No fire outside that night. We sat at the little table playing cards by lantern light, not saying much. At one point, Jacob got up to use the bathroom, just a spot behind the cabin, and when he came back, he was walking fast. He didn't say anything, just locked the door behind him. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. Later, after we climbed into our sleeping bags, I lay there staring into the dark. The silence was deeper now. No wind, no owls, just stillness. Then, somewhere far off, I heard it. A single knock, like wood on wood. Then another, closer this time. I held my breath. I thought maybe it was a tree branch falling, or a deer stepping on something. But it was too regular, too steady. I glanced at Jacob. He was awake. I could tell by his breathing. Neither of us moved. The knocking came again, 3 times, then silence. Eventually, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember was waking to gray light seeping through the window. I sat up, stretched, and stepped outside. Everything looked normal. Cold dew on the grass, birds chirping, steam rising off the roof. But as I walked around to the back of the cabin, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. Footprints. Not boots, not hiking shoes, bare feet, deep impressions in the soft dirt, wide and flat with visible toes. Someone had been walking around barefoot in the woods in the middle of the night. The prints circled the cabin. They led to the back wall, then back out into the trees. Jacob came out and saw them too. He didn't say anything, just went back inside and started packing his bag. We left an hour later. The hike back to the truck felt different. We didn't talk. Every sound made us stop and listen. Every bird call, every crack of a twig. Felt like something was behind us, just out of sight, watching, waiting. When we got to the truck, I looked back at the trees one last time. I half expected to see someone standing there, but there was nothing. We drove back to town in silence. Neither of us brought up the trip for a long time. It wasn't until weeks later that Jacob finally said what I'd been thinking. That tree we found, the stacked rocks, the barefoot prints. Someone was out there. Not a hunter, not a camper. Someone who didn't want to be found. Someone who had been watching us. We never figured out who it was. Maybe a squatter, maybe a survivalist, maybe just some old hermit who lived off the grid. But the way those prints circled the cabin, the knocking in the middle of the night, the stacked rocks like a marker, whoever it was, they knew we were there. They let us know in their own quiet way, and that was enough. I haven't been back since. I still love the woods. I still go camping, but now I choose public campsites, places with people, with lights and rangers and maps. Because as much as I crave peace and solitude, I learned something important that weekend. Just because you don't see anyone out there doesn't mean you're alone. I don't know why I agreed to go on that camping trip. I wasn't in the best place mentally. Just got laid off a few weeks earlier and hadn't been sleeping well. But when my cousin texted saying he and a couple buddies were planning to camp up in the national forest near the Idaho-Montana border, I just said yeah without thinking. He said they were trying to disconnect for a few days, no phones, just hiking, cooking over a fire, and sleeping out in the open. At the time, it sounded like exactly what I needed. Something quiet, simple, no distractions. We drove out early Friday morning. It was a 4-hour drive, half of it on a winding 2-lane road that turned into dirt about 25 miles out from the trailhead. We left our phones in the glove box of my cousin's Jeep before locking it up and setting off on foot. It felt weird at first not checking my phone every 5 minutes, but once we were about a mile in, I started to feel okay with it. I could hear myself think. I noticed things like the rustling of branches and the way the wind moved through the trees. I felt lighter, like maybe I could actually relax. We hiked about 8 or 9 miles in total that day, mostly uphill through dense pine. The trail wasn't well maintained, and we had to step over a lot of fallen limbs and duck under branches. I didn't mind, though. Felt like we were really getting off the grid. The plan was to camp near a shallow creek that one of the guys, Drew, had been to once before. He said it was quiet, out of the way, and that the water was clean enough to filter for drinking. We made it there around 3 or 4 in the afternoon and set up camp on a flat patch about 100 feet from the creek. There wasn't a soul around. No sounds but birds, bugs, and the occasional snap of a branch in the distance. We pitched our tents, gathered firewood, and boiled some water for freeze-dried meals. It wasn't exactly gourmet, but after a long hike, even bland chili mac hits the spot. I remember sitting on a big rock with my boots off, just soaking my sore feet in the cold creek water. It felt like I hadn't stopped moving in months. Not really. That was the first moment I truly sat still. We stayed up till about 10 that night. The fire burned low, and we lay back on our sleeping pads, looking up at the stars. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember blinking and then waking up sometime around 3 a.m. Freezing cold. The temperature had dropped hard, and the air was damp with that bone-deep chill you only get in the mountains. I had to pee, so I unzipped my sleeping bag, pulled on my boots without lacing them, and stepped out into the dark. The fire was just coals, glowing faintly. I walked about 30 paces from the tents and relieved myself behind a bush. That's when I heard it, somewhere out past the creek. A crunch, like a footstep, then nothing. I stood still, waiting. Could have been an animal. Could have been a branch falling. I told myself not to panic. I had grown up in the woods. I camped with my dad and uncles since I was a kid. I knew the difference between the sound of a deer and something else. Whatever made that noise was heavy, a lot heavier than any deer I'd ever seen. I slowly walked back to camp and got in my tent. I stayed awake for a while, just listening. The longer I lay there, the more I started hearing things. Tiny pops in the brush, faint cracks of wood shifting. My heartbeat picked up, but eventually, I guess I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, we all made jokes about how cold it was and how much our backs hurt. No one said anything about strange noises. I didn't bring it up. Maybe it had been nothing. We made oatmeal and coffee over the fire and packed up for a day hike to a nearby ridge that supposedly had a great view. It was another 4 miles, steep and winding. Along the way, I kept glancing back. I don't know why. I just had this feeling like something was behind us. Not right behind us, just back a bit, keeping distance. But every time I looked, it was just trees and brush and shadow. We got to the ridge around noon, had lunch, and sat around talking for a while before heading back. Coming back down was faster, but I still couldn't shake that uneasiness. Like we weren't alone out there. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, like a presence you feel more than you see. A silence that felt heavier than it should have. That night was colder. I remember because I could see my breath when I woke up to stoke the fire. Around 1 a.m., I heard something again. This time it was closer, more deliberate. It wasn't walking around like an animal sniffing the ground. It was slower, more careful, like someone trying not to be heard. But I heard it. So faint I thought I might be imagining it at first, but then there was a twig snap. Then another further off. I sat up in my sleeping bag and held my breath, listening. I couldn't hear breathing or voices, just the movement, controlled, intentional. I didn't sleep much after that. The next day, I told the others I thought someone might be out here with us. They laughed it off, said it was probably a bear or an elk. I didn't argue, but I started watching the woods more closely. We spent most of the day fishing the creek, filtering water, and napping in hammocks we'd set up between the trees. But my eyes kept drifting to the edge of the forest. I don't know what I was looking for. A shape, a shadow, anything out of place. Late in the afternoon, I found something that made my stomach twist. I had wandered off a bit looking for dry branches for the fire when I saw something about 20 feet off the trail. A footprint, not a boot print. A bare foot, human, right in the dirt. The ground was soft from the moisture in the air, and the print was clear as day. I stared at it for what felt like a long time. I looked around, checked for more, but didn't see any others. I didn't tell the others. I should have, but I didn't. I didn't want to get laughed at again or make it a big deal if it wasn't one. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who the hell would be barefoot out here? We were miles from the nearest road. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat up in my tent, knife in my hand, listening. The woods were dead silent. Not even crickets. That's what scared me the most, the silence. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. Footsteps, closed this time, just past the fire pit. Slow, deliberate crunches in the pine needles. I stayed perfectly still. Through the mesh of the tent, I could see the vague outline of someone. Tall, unmoving, facing the tents. I held my breath and didn't blink. The shape stood there for what felt like forever. Then it turned and walked into the woods without a sound. The first light, I packed my gear. I told the others I wasn't feeling well and wanted to head back. They gave me a hard time but agreed to hike out with me. Nobody talked much on the way back. Took us almost 6 hours to reach the Jeep. When we got there, we found something that made all of us go silent. On the back window, someone had smeared a handprint into the dust. A bare hand. Thin fingers, long. The kind of hand you'd expect to see on someone starving. We didn't talk about it. We just got in the Jeep and drove. I stared out the window the whole way, watching the trees slide past, wondering who was out there, wondering if they were still watching us, hidden behind some tree or bush, smiling to themselves. I've never gone back to that forest, never even thought about camping again. I still hike sometimes, but only on busy trails, always during the day. I carry a GPS, a flare gun, and a second knife now. I never sleep in a tent without checking for footprints around the site. Some part of me knows that whoever or whatever that was out there probably wasn't just passing through. They lived out there, off the grid. No shoes, no fire, no voice, and they weren't curious. They were waiting. The sun had barely risen when we gathered in front of my house, ready for our annual camping trip. It was the 1st of May, the day we always marked for our tradition, and this year was no different. We'd been planning it for weeks, each of us contributing to the usual haul of food, drinks, and camping gear. As always, a few of us stopped by the convenience store to grab some beer for the road. The plan was simple: head to the same camping spot we'd been to a dozen times, deep in the woods, set up camp, and drink until the sun went down. It was the kind of trip where we could just let loose, have fun, and forget about everything else for a while. By 5 a.m., everyone was packed into the car, bags full of stuff, and our spirits were high. It was still chilly outside, and the sun hadn't quite come up yet, but it didn't matter. We were used to the early mornings, the long drive, and the excitement of reaching our destination. It was tradition, and no matter what, we kept it. We drove through the countryside, the roads lined with the kind of greenery that always made me feel at ease. We passed the town and headed further out, deeper into the forest. When we finally reached the campsite, it was still relatively quiet. A few other cars were parked nearby, people unloading their gear and setting up their own spots. But we didn't pay them much attention. Everyone else was there for the same thing, enjoying the outdoors and having a good time. The sun was starting to warm the air as we set up our tents. We got a fire going, the smoke rising into the clear sky, and cracked open the first beers of the day. As usual, the whole group was in high spirits, laughing, joking, and just enjoying the moment. The spot we picked was nestled in the woods, just far enough from the other campers to feel like we had some privacy. But even so, we could still hear faint music in the distance from the other side of the campsite. It was nothing unusual, just some people playing music to keep themselves entertained, like we were. Hours passed. The day turned into late afternoon, and we found ourselves with empty cans scattered around the campfire. The music from the other campers had been playing pretty steadily throughout the day, but as the sun started to dip behind the trees around 7 or 8 p.m., the music suddenly stopped. First, we thought nothing of it. We figured the people near us were just winding down for the night, maybe getting some sleep. It wasn't uncommon for people to pack up and leave on the night of May 1st, since most of them were only there for the day. But we were staying for the whole weekend. Around that time, one of my friends, Jake, said he was going to go over and ask if anyone had a lighter. We'd forgotten to bring one, and he thought it wouldn't hurt to check with the nearby campers. He wandered off in the direction of where the music had been, but when he came back a few minutes later, he looked kind of surprised. "They're gone," he said, shaking his head. "I went over there, and no one's around. Everything's packed up. They must have left early." We all stood there for a moment, trying to process what he said. It didn't make sense. Normally, people stuck around at least until the 2nd of May, and we'd never seen anyone leave that early. But we shrugged it off. Maybe they just had somewhere else to be. Jake found a lighter, and we got the fire going again. It was starting to get dark now, the kind of dark where the trees almost swallowed up the light, and the air had that cool, crisp edge to it. We cracked open more beers and kept talking, trying not to think too much about the weirdness of the situation. The night carried on as normal, the sound of our laughter and conversation filling the space around us. But around 10 p.m., something changed. We heard it at first, a faint sound off in the distance, something like a giggle, the high-pitched laughter of girls playing in the woods. It wasn't unusual to hear people messing around in the dark, but the way it sounded made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It didn't sound like normal laughter. It was distorted, like something was off, and it wasn't just the laughter. We started hearing footsteps, quick, light steps, like someone was running through the forest. We all froze, exchanging nervous glances. It didn't make sense. There was no one around, and even if there had been, no one would have been running like that in the woods. Felt wrong. "What the hell was that?" someone asked. "It's probably just some drunk people screwing around," Jake said, trying to brush it off. "Let's just keep drinking." We passed the beers around again, the laughter coming easier now as we tried to ignore the strange sounds. But the noises didn't stop. The running footsteps grew closer, and the laughter kept echoing through the trees, each time a little more distant, but still there. We'd drunk enough to feel pretty buzzed by now, but that didn't stop the fear from creeping in. Something didn't sit right about it. At this point, everyone was on edge, trying to act casual but feeling uneasy. The air around us felt thicker, like the forest had become a different place altogether. Then, we heard something even worse. Footsteps, heavy ones, coming towards us from the trees. They weren't fast or light like the running from earlier. These were slow, deliberate steps, like someone or something was walking toward us. Everyone immediately tensed up. We grabbed anything we could find, shovels, knives, sticks, and we prepared ourselves. We didn't know what we were going to face, but we weren't going to be caught off guard. But nothing came. The footsteps stopped just outside the clearing. We waited, hearts pounding in our chests, the crackling fire the only sound in the air. I swear, for a moment the whole forest went quiet. There was no sound of wind, no rustling of leaves, just absolute silence. The air felt charged, like something was about to happen. But then, the silence was broken by a snap of a twig somewhere to our left. We all jumped, our eyes darting to the darkness. We stood there for a long time, listening. The footsteps didn't return. It wasn't until we started to settle down again that we heard them once more, coming from the edge of the camp. They were getting closer. We all stood up, ready to fight whatever was out there. But again, nothing came. The footsteps stopped just out of view, and no one emerged. We kept quiet, waiting in the dark. We knew there was something out there, but whatever it was staying just far enough away that we couldn't see it. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The footsteps, the laughter, everything. It all went quiet. By the time we decided to try to get some sleep, we were all exhausted, but the tension in the air didn't let up. We lay in our tents, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the only thing that kept us from thinking too much about what had happened. Still, no one slept well that night. Every little noise had us on edge. A branch breaking, a distant snap of a twig. It all made us jump. When the morning came, we were all awake before the sun even rose. We were too afraid to stay in the tents any longer, and we all piled out, looking around. But there was no sign of anyone. No one had been there. The campsite was as quiet as it had been when we first arrived, and the tracks we thought we'd seen in the ground were gone. We looked for signs of whoever or whatever had been around us, but there was nothing. No footprints, no traces, just the quiet of the forest. As we packed up to leave, none of us said much. We all knew what we had experienced, and though we couldn't explain it, we were all shaken. That night, whatever had been in the woods with us wasn't human, and we were lucky that it didn't come any closer. To this day, we've never talked about it much. Maybe we were all just drunk, maybe we heard things that weren't there, but something happened that night, and none of us will ever forget it. Even now, I can't help but wonder if we were just a little too close to something we shouldn't have been. I had planned the trip months in advance. It was supposed to be a break from everything: work stress, city noise, social pressure. I didn't want to go with a group or meet up with anyone. I just wanted silence, trees, and space to think. I had picked a place deep in the national forest, a small, barely known primitive site about 4 hours away. It was the kind of place you wouldn't find unless you were specifically looking for it. No running water, no cell signal, just a few dirt pads for tents and a fire ring surrounded by old pine trees. It was marked by a small sign off a gravel road, and even that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. I arrived late in the afternoon, just as the shadows were starting to stretch across the forest floor. I parked my car off to the side of the clearing and got out to look around. There were no other cars, no tents, no sounds of people, just birds, insects, and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. It was exactly what I needed. I set up my tent at the far end of the clearing, on slightly higher ground near the edge of the forest. From there, I could see the whole site, flat, open, quiet. I laid out my sleeping bag, unrolled a small foam mat, and put my backpack inside. I kept my cooler near the fire ring and started collecting some wood. There wasn't a lot of dry wood around, but I managed to scrape up enough to get a small fire going. Nothing too big, just enough to cook some food and keep the bugs away. Dinner was simple, some instant noodles, a little beef jerky, and a can of beans I heated up in a pot. After I ate, I sat on a log by the fire, just staring into the flames. No phone, no music, just the crackling of the fire and the background noise of the forest. As night fell, the air turned colder. The fire gave off enough warmth to keep me comfortable, and I sat there for a long time, listening. Coyotes howled in the distance. An owl called from somewhere above. I had been on a lot of camping trips in my life, but something about this one felt more isolated than usual. I told myself that was the point. That's what I came for. Eventually, I let the fire die down and got ready for bed. I brushed my teeth a little ways away from camp, packed up the food so no animals would get into it, and zipped myself into the tent. The sleeping bag was warm, and the mat helped dull the uneven ground beneath me. I lay there for a while with my eyes closed, letting the distant sounds of the forest wash over me. But I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking I was hearing footsteps. Not animal footsteps, heavier than that. At first, I thought maybe it was just a deer, or maybe my brain was just trying to fill the silence with something familiar. I rolled onto my side and told myself it was fine. I'd camped in bear country before. Nothing out here was going to hurt me if I did everything right. But then I heard it again. A slow, steady crunching noise, like someone walking across dry leaves. Not close, but not far either. Just far enough to keep me guessing. I held my breath and listened. The sound would stop. Then it would start again. Not coming closer, just moving, pacing. I thought maybe I was hearing a raccoon or a couple of deer. But deer didn't pace, and raccoons weren't that heavy. I sat up slowly, unzipped the tent just a bit, and peeked out. It was pitch black beyond the dying glow of the fire. I couldn't see anything, not even movement. I waited, listened. The sound was gone. I zipped the tent shut again, told myself I was being paranoid, and lay back down. But the unease stayed with me. I kept listening, waiting for the noise to return. After maybe 20 minutes, I must have drifted off. I woke up to a loud snap. It was sharp and close, like a thick branch breaking under weight. I sat up immediately. The fire was out. Everything around me was completely black. I could barely see the outline of the tent walls. I fumbled for my flashlight and switched it on. The beam lit up the inside of the tent, but it didn't help me see outside. I was frozen, listening for any other sounds. First, nothing, just wind. Then more crunching, definitely footsteps. Slow, measured, not an animal sniffing around, not something small. I heard the steps move along the edge of the site, maybe 30 feet away. I turned off the flashlight to hear better and held my breath. Then it stopped. I stayed like that for what felt like forever. 10, maybe 15 minutes. No more steps, no movement. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to unzip the tent again. I didn't want to call out either. What if it was a person? What if someone had followed me up here? Eventually, I heard the steps again, this time further away, going back into the woods. I waited until they were completely gone, and even then, I stayed up most of the night. I never turned the flashlight back on. I just sat there, hugging my knees, ears straining in the silence. When morning finally came, I stepped outside with the flashlight in my hand. Everything looked normal, nothing disturbed. The fire ring was the same. The cooler was untouched. But I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A partial boot print in the dirt, just off the trail that led deeper into the woods. It wasn't mine. Too big. The sole had a different tread pattern. It was faint, but definitely there. I felt that cold weight settle in my chest. Someone had been out there last night, walking around my site. I packed everything up fast. Didn't bother making breakfast. I threw everything into the car, folded the tent in half, stuffed it into the trunk, and got out of there. As I was leaving the site, I looked back and scanned the tree line. Something moved, just a flicker. Not enough to see a full figure, but enough to know I wasn't imagining it. I drove the gravel road faster than I should have, bouncing over potholes and swerving around tight corners. I didn't slow down until I hit the pavement. It was hours before I had cell service again. I pulled over and sat on the side of the road, trying to catch my breath. I looked up maps of the area, thinking maybe there were other campsites nearby. Maybe someone had gotten lost. Maybe a ranger had been checking the area. But there were no other campsites within miles. Just old logging roads and wilderness. And the Forest Service site confirmed that the primitive site I stayed at was rarely maintained. It even had a note saying visitors should camp at their own risk and be aware that emergency services may not be available. I thought about reporting it, but what would I even say? That I heard footsteps and saw a boot print? That someone might have watched me while I slept? It didn't seem like enough, and I couldn't prove any of it. Still, the whole thing stuck with me. I kept thinking about how remote it was, how quiet, how no one would have known I was out there. No one but me, and maybe one other person. I didn't go camping again for a long time after that. Not alone, not in a place without cell service. I stuck to campgrounds with other people around, even if I hated the noise. Even now, I always check the area around my site. I look for footprints. I keep a fire going all night. And I always sleep with a knife and flashlight within reach. I never saw whoever it was. I never found out if they were passing through, or if they'd been watching me the whole time. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw, and I know how it felt. It felt like I wasn't supposed to be there, and someone else already was. Back when I was about 14 or 15, my family used to go camping at this state park a couple hours away from where we lived. It was kind of a tradition every summer. We didn't go anywhere fancy. No cross-country road trips or resorts or anything like that. Just this same state park with thick woods, gravel roads, and a small lake that looked more like a big pond. It wasn't some wild remote place or anything. It had bathrooms, showers, and the campsites weren't that far apart. But when it got dark, especially deeper into the woods, it could feel like you were really out there. Like nature had just swallowed the rest of the world. That year, my best friend had come with us. He was about the same age as me. Every night after dinner, we had this little tradition. We called it the ritual, like it was some kind of secret challenge we gave ourselves. We'd leave our campsite after dark and wander off into the woods. Not crazy far, just far enough that we couldn't see the fires or hear people talking anymore. We weren't doing anything dumb like trying to get lost or pushing survival limits. We just liked walking in the woods in the dark. It was quiet. Still, it made our hearts beat faster, even when nothing happened. We always took flashlights, but part of the ritual was keeping them off unless we really needed them. We tried to let our eyes adjust, to navigate using moonlight or whatever was left of the evening sky. There was something about that darkness, walking carefully so we didn't trip over a root or bash our shins on a log, that made it feel like a test of nerve. Sometimes we'd stop and just listen to the woods. You could hear so much more at night. The bugs, the wind, a frog way off by the lake. Sometimes even footsteps if a raccoon or something else was moving through the underbrush. We'd get each other spooked just from imagining what those sounds were. That particular night, we'd both been in kind of a weird mood. Not scared exactly, just edgy. The way kids can get when the air feels off. It wasn't stormy, but the sky was heavy, overcast. The moon was behind the clouds, so it was darker than usual. Not pitch black, but we were definitely leaning more on our flashlights. We kept clicking them on just for a second to get our bearings, then shutting them off again. We went further than we usually did that night. I remember that clearly. Normally, we'd go maybe 5-10 minutes out, but this time we kept walking and walking. We passed the familiar logs and tree trunks we usually turned around at and just kept going, cutting through shallow brush, stepping over half-rotted branches. There wasn't a path where we were. We were just moving in one direction, trying to keep it roughly straight. I remember checking my watch at some point and thinking we were probably half a mile or so from the nearest campsite. Not dangerous far, but far enough that we'd have to focus to get back without doubling over our steps. We were just walking in that total quiet, maybe 20 or 30 minutes into the woods, when we heard it. A soft whisper behind us. Not words, not at first, Just this kind of breathy sound, like when someone's talking under their breath or mumbling. It was so quiet we almost missed it. We stopped and turned our heads. Neither of us said anything. We just clicked on our flashlights and spun around at the same time. There was nothing there, just trees, brush. The light bounced off trunks and leaves, casting moving shadows, but there wasn't anything unusual. We swept the area with the beams, but there was nothing to see. It was so quiet. No birds, no frogs, no movement, not even the wind. That made the whole thing feel weirder. We told ourselves it was nothing, probably a squirrel or something rustling in the leaves, even though we both knew it hadn't sounded like an animal. We kept walking a little faster this time. I remember keeping the flashlight on now, not wanting to walk blind anymore. My friend was quiet. He wasn't making jokes like he usually did when we got nervous. Then we heard it again. This time it was louder, still soft but definitely clearer. It was behind us again, closer than before, still just whispering, except this time it sounded like actual words. Nonsense words, not a sentence, not anything that made sense. But there was a rhythm to it, like someone talking in their sleep. We both stopped immediately. I turned, shining my flashlight in the direction we'd just come from. My friend did the same. We slowly scanned the area, our beams crossing back and forth over tree trunks, bushes, piles of dead leaves. My heart was pounding now. We didn't say anything, just looked, listened, and then we saw her. She was crawling, on her hands and knees, maybe 20 or 30 feet away, barely visible through the brush. She was low to the ground, moving slowly, like she was trying to stay hidden. She was wearing dark clothes, maybe black or dark gray, and her hair looked dirty or wet. Her clothes were caked with dirt, like she'd been crawling through the forest for a while, and she was still whispering, just random words. Her mouth moved constantly. Nothing she said made any sense. It was just a stream of sounds, half-formed thoughts, maybe even fragments of song lyrics or something she'd heard on TV. It was creepy as hell. The sound of it carried in this weird way, like it was floating through the trees but coming from nowhere. She didn't notice us at first. She just kept crawling, head down. When she did finally lift her head and realize we were staring at her, she stopped. Then, without any hesitation, she stood up slowly, brushing herself off a little. She looked at us and said she was looking for her campsite. That was it. No emotion in her voice, no panic or fear, just that flat statement, like she was answering a cashier asking if she wanted a bag. Her face was pale, and her eyes looked wrong. Not scary, just kind of unfocused. She swayed slightly as she stood. I remember her wiping at her arms, smearing dirt across her skin like she didn't even notice she was doing it. At that point, my instincts were torn. I was creeped out, yeah. Every part of me wanted to get away. But there was also this stronger sense of this is a person. Someone out here who clearly didn't belong in the middle of the woods at night crawling on all fours. She didn't look homeless or anything. She looked like someone who'd come with a group but had wandered off. We didn't say anything, but we kind of looked at each other and then just started walking. She followed us. We didn't really offer. She didn't really ask. She just fell in step behind us, a few feet back, still muttering to herself every once in a while. I kept glancing over my shoulder to make sure she was still there. My friend looked nervous, too, but neither of us wanted to say anything out loud. I think we were afraid if we talked about how weird it was, it would get worse somehow. Like naming it would make it more real. The walk back felt way longer than the walk out. It was like time slowed down. Every crunch of our boots on the forest floor sounded way too loud. The flashlight beams bounced with every step, and I kept thinking about how easy it would be to lose the trail and wander deeper into the woods. When we finally started seeing the glow of the campfires in the distance, I felt this huge weight come off my chest. We weren't in danger anymore. We were almost back. We brought her to the nearest camp we found, a group of older people who were playing cards around a picnic table. When they saw her, their reactions were weirdly casual. Like, "Oh, there she is." Turns out she was part of their group. They thought she'd gone to the bathroom or maybe to another campsite to borrow something. No one had been looking for her. Someone helped her sit down and gave her water. One of the women said something about her drinking too much wine earlier, then someone else muttered about maybe mixing edibles with booze and how she always went too far. They kind of laughed it off. No one really acted like it was a big deal, but to me it had felt huge out there in the dark, like we'd stumbled across something dangerous or wrong, and now it was just being brushed aside. My friend and I didn't stay long. We nodded to the group and walked back to our own campsite. The fire was still going, and my parents were just sitting around it, talking. They asked where we'd been, and we just said, the ritual, like always. They didn't press us. Later that night, lying in my sleeping bag, I couldn't stop thinking about how close we'd come to not seeing her. If we'd turned around earlier or taken a slightly different route, we never would have found her. She would have spent the whole night out there, crawling around in the dark, whispering to no one. Who knows what could have happened to her? Maybe she would have passed out, maybe wandered even further. It didn't feel like we'd done something heroic or brave. It just felt lucky, like we'd accidentally stumbled into something that could have gone very wrong for someone. The next morning, we didn't see her again. I don't know if they left early or stayed out of sight, but she wasn't around when we walked past their site. The rest of the trip felt normal. We still did the ritual, but we didn't go out as far anymore. We kept the flashlights on. Neither of us said why, we just did. Years later, I still think about that night sometimes. Not in a scary way, just in that quiet kind of way where something brushes against your memory and lingers. She was just a person. Drunk. High. Lost. Nothing supernatural. No monsters. But seeing her like that, crawling and whispering in the dirt, felt like something out of a dream. The kind you wake up from sweating and backpacking has always been a big part of my life. For years, I chased the trails, packed my bag, and went deep into the mountains, always chasing the quiet, the wild, and the chance to test myself against nature. I've had countless trips, some beautiful, some challenging, but the scariest moments I've ever faced out there weren't from wild animals or getting lost or any of the usual outdoor dangers. No, the thing that truly scared me to my core, that made me feel utterly small and powerless, was lightning. I remember my first real run-in with it like it was yesterday, even though it was years ago. I was at Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico, which is one of those legendary backpacking spots for scouts. The land there is rugged, wild, and vast. It's a place that makes you feel alive in a way few others can. During the day, the sun burns hot and bright, and at night the stars stretch out endlessly. We were deep in the backcountry, hiking and camping, the days full of miles on the trail and the nights around campfires. It was everything a scout trip should be. One evening, after a long day of hiking, my group settled into a small clearing to eat dinner. The sky was a strange mix of dark, brooding clouds and patches of sunlight shining through. I remember thinking it was an odd sky, the kind that makes you feel like something is about to change, but no one said much. We were hungry and tired, ready to eat and get some rest. Then it happened. Without warning, lightning struck a tree about 50 feet away from us. The blast was brutal and immediate. The tree exploded with a sound like a cannon going off, splintering and cracking. Shards of wood and bark flew through the air as the lightning ripped through the trunk. The ground beneath us shook, and for a moment, all of us froze in place, stunned and wide-eyed. The noise was deafening, the smell of burnt wood sharp in the air. Dinner went flying everywhere, our carefully prepared food dumped into the dirt. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I remember my hands trembling as I grabbed my pack, ready to move just in case the storm decided to get closer. That flash of white-hot light, the roar of thunder that seemed to tear the sky apart. It was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Up to that point, storms had been something you could sit out or hide from, but that moment made it clear how small and vulnerable I really was. We didn't get much more sleep that night. Every crack of thunder kept me alert, every flash of lightning making my stomach twist. That strike was close enough to remind me how fast and furious a storm could be. And over the next 2 weeks, the storms came and went, always chasing us, never letting us forget. But nothing compared to what happened months later on the Ray Lakes Trail in Kings Canyon, California. That trip, that night, is something I still replay in my mind, and I don't think I ever will forget the way fear took over me. The raw power of nature pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. We had been hiking for days, moving slowly through the granite peaks and deep valleys of the Sierra Nevada. The air was crisp, cold even, and the beauty of the landscape was breathtaking. Jagged rocks, pine forests, rivers that cut through the valley floors like silver ribbons. It was the kind of place you dream about when you want to escape the noise of everyday life. That day, we reached a campsite by a river nestled in a tight granite valley. The site was beautiful but a little unsettling. The valley walls were steep and closed in all around, and you could see how the river carved through the rocks, cutting deep into the earth. There were clear signs that this spot had flooded in the past, especially after heavy rains. Still, it was the designated National Park Service site, so we figured it was safe enough to spend the night. I set up my tent near the riverbank, listening to the constant murmur of water rushing over rocks. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, fresh and alive. As the evening wore on, dark clouds gathered overhead. It was the kind of sky that makes you stop and take notice, the clouds thick, heavy, almost black. A storm was coming. We ate quickly and retreated into our tents, trying to get some rest before the worst hit. Sleep was uneasy, the air thick with anticipation. Then, at around 2 in the morning, everything changed. A flash of lightning struck with a brightness so intense I swear I could see the inside of my tent through my closed eyelids. The light was pure white, almost burning, followed immediately by a thunderclap so loud and close it shook the ground beneath me. The sound wasn't just thunder. It was like the earth was ripping open, tearing itself apart. The roar lasted for what felt like an eternity. Then came the rain. The sky opened up and poured down torrents of water. The thunder didn't stop rolling across the valley. It kept coming in waves that rolled over the granite walls and echoed endlessly. The lightning strikes were constant, each flash so bright it turned the night into day, showing the forest and river outside in stark detail even through the thin walls of my tent. I could see trees bending under the force of the wind, the river swelling and rushing with more urgency than before. I lay there frozen, every nerve alive with fear, knowing the river was rising and could flood the site at any moment. I was caught between two deadly threats: the chance of being struck by lightning in the open or being swept away if the river burst its banks. The hours dragged on. Every lightning flash was like a warning shot, a reminder that nature was beyond control. I could hear the rain pounding on the tent, the wind whipping the fabric, the thunder crashing so loud I thought it might burst my eardrums. Sleep was impossible. I was soaked, cold, and terrified, but there was nowhere to go. The storm had me trapped. When dawn finally came, the storm passed as suddenly as it had arrived. The valley was quiet except for the swollen river, which raged louder than ever, carving deeper into the rocks. The campsite was soaked, everything covered in mud and debris. We packed up quickly, shaken and exhausted, eager to leave that narrow valley behind. That night was the closest I ever came to feeling like nature might actually kill me. My third close encounter with lightning was in the Swiss Alps, high up on a descent through a rocky field. The air was thinner, colder, and even the sun seemed weaker. We were miles from shelter, caught in an open space with nothing but stones and sparse grass. A storm rolled in fast, black clouds sweeping across the sky like a dark tide. The first flashes came before the rain, bright lines splitting the sky and striking dangerously close. There was no cover, no trees, no cabin, just us crouched low against the cold rocks, praying silently. The lightning strikes came closer and closer, each one shaking the earth and lighting up the night with jagged bolts. The wind howled and the rain started, cold and sharp against my skin. I remember feeling completely exposed, vulnerable in a way I never had before. We stayed there for what felt like hours, just waiting and hoping the storm would move on. I kept my head low, my body tense, heart hammering. I felt like any second the sky could open up and end everything. Those 3 experiences have stayed with me over the years. I still love the mountains, the wilderness, the quiet moments watching the world breathe around me. But whenever I see the first dark clouds gathering or hear the distant rumble of thunder, something inside me shifts. A primal part of me wakes up and screams at me to find shelter, to get indoors, to hide from the sky. There's something humbling and terrifying about lightning. Its raw power made visible, a reminder that no matter how skilled or prepared you think you are, you're just a small part of a vast, unpredictable world. It can strike without warning, it can change everything in an instant, and you can do nothing but wait. After those trips, I always made sure to respect storms and never underestimate how dangerous they are. I learned to watch the skies, to read the wind, to seek shelter early. Because when you're out there, far from help, the sky is the one thing you can't control, and lightning is the one thing that can stop you cold, no matter how strong or brave you think you are. Now, when I camp, I always carry that memory with me. The crack of thunder that made my ears ring, the blinding flash that froze me in place, the pounding rain that soaked me to the bone. I've seen what lightning can do, and I know the mountain can turn deadly in an instant. And that's the real story. Not about ghosts or legends, but about the power of nature itself, the wild, unstoppable force that humbles us all, when the sky lights up and the world shakes beneath your feet. The sun had barely risen when we gathered in front of my house, ready for our annual camping trip. It was the 1st of May, the day we always marked for our tradition, and this year was no different. We'd been planning it for weeks, each of us contributing to the usual haul of food, drinks, and camping gear. As always, a few of us stopped by the convenience store to grab some beer for the road. The plan was simple: head to the same camping spot we'd been to a dozen times, deep in the woods, set up camp, and drink until the sun went down. It was the kind of trip where we could just let loose, have fun, and forget about everything else for a while. By 5 a.m., everyone was packed into the car, bags full of stuff, and our spirits were high. It was still chilly outside, and the sun hadn't quite come up yet, but it didn't matter. We were used to the early mornings, the long drive, and the excitement of reaching our destination. It was tradition, and no matter what, we kept it. We drove through the countryside, the roads lined with the kind of greenery that always made me feel at ease. We passed the town and headed further out, deeper into the forest. When we finally reached the campsite, it was still relatively quiet. A few other cars were parked nearby, people unloading their gear and setting up their own spots. But we didn't pay them much attention. Everyone else was there for the same thing, enjoying the outdoors and having a good time. The sun was starting to warm the air as we set up our tents. We got a fire going, the smoke rising into the clear sky, and cracked open the first beers of the day. As usual, the whole group was in high spirits, laughing, joking, and just enjoying the moment. The spot we picked was nestled in the woods, just far enough from the other campers to feel like we had some privacy. But even so, we could still hear faint music in the distance from the other side of the campsite. It was nothing unusual, just some people playing music to keep themselves entertained, like we were. Hours passed. The day turned into late afternoon, and we found ourselves with empty cans scattered around the campfire. The music from the other campers had been playing pretty steadily throughout the day, but as the sun started to dip behind the trees around 7 or 8 p.m., the music suddenly stopped. At first, we thought nothing of it. We figured the people near us were just winding down for the night, maybe getting some sleep. It wasn't uncommon for people to pack up and leave on the night of May 1st, since most of them were only there for the day. But we were staying for the whole weekend. Around that time, one of my friends, Jake, said he was going to go over and ask if anyone had a lighter. We'd forgotten to bring one, and he thought it wouldn't hurt to check with the nearby campers. He wandered off in the direction of where the music had been, but when he came back a few minutes later, he looked kind of surprised. "They're gone," he said, shaking his head. "I went over there, and no one's around. Everything's packed up. They must have left early." We all stood there for a moment, trying to process what he said. It didn't make sense. Normally, people stuck around at least until the 2nd of May, and we'd never seen anyone leave that early. But we shrugged it off. Maybe they just had somewhere else to be. Jake found a lighter, and we got the fire going again. It was starting to get dark now, the kind of dark where the trees almost swallowed up the light, and the air had that cool, crisp edge to it. We cracked open more beers and kept talking, trying not to think too much about the weirdness of the situation. The night carried on as normal, the sound of our laughter and conversation filling the space around us. But around 10 p.m., something changed. We heard it at first, a faint sound off in the distance, something like a giggle, the high-pitched laughter of girls playing in the woods. It wasn't unusual to hear people messing around in the dark, but the way it sounded made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It didn't sound like normal laughter. It was distorted, like something was off, and it wasn't just the laughter. We started hearing footsteps, quick, light steps, like someone was running through the forest. We all froze, exchanging nervous glances. It didn't make sense. There was no one around, and even if there had been, no one would have been running like that in the woods. Felt wrong. What the hell was that? Someone asked. It's probably just some drunk people screwing around, Jake said, trying to brush it off. Let's just keep drinking. We passed the beers around again, the laughter coming easier now as we tried to ignore the strange sounds. But the noises didn't stop. The running footsteps grew closer, and the laughter kept echoing through the trees, each time a little more distant, but still there. We'd drunk enough to feel pretty buzzed by now, but that didn't stop the fear from creeping in. Something didn't sit right about it. At this point, everyone was on edge, trying to act casual but feeling uneasy. The air around us felt thicker, like the forest had become a different place altogether. Then, we heard something even worse. Footsteps, heavy ones, coming towards us from the trees. They weren't fast or light like the running from earlier. These were slow, deliberate steps, like someone or something was walking toward us. Everyone immediately tensed up. We grabbed anything we could find, shovels, knives, sticks, and we prepared ourselves. We didn't know what we were going to face, but we weren't going to be caught off guard. But nothing came. The footsteps stopped just outside the clearing. We waited, hearts pounding in our chests, the crackling fire the only sound in the air. I swear, for a moment the whole forest went quiet. There was no sound of wind, no rustling of leaves, just absolute silence. The air felt charged, like something was about to happen. But then, the silence was broken by a snap of a twig somewhere to our left. We all jumped, our eyes darting to the darkness. We stood there for a long time, listening. The footsteps didn't return. It wasn't until we started to settle down again that we heard them once more, coming from the edge of the camp. They were getting closer. We all stood up, ready to fight whatever was out there. But again, nothing came. The footsteps stopped just out of view, and no one emerged. We kept quiet, waiting in the dark. We knew there was something out there, but whatever it was staying just far enough away that we couldn't see it. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The footsteps, the laughter, everything. It all went quiet. By the time we decided to try to get some sleep, we were all exhausted, but the tension in the air didn't let up. We lay in our tents, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the only thing that kept us from thinking too much about what had happened. Still, no one slept well that night. Every little noise had us on edge. A branch breaking, a distant snap of a twig. It all made us jump. When the morning came, we were all awake before the sun even rose. We were too afraid to stay in the tents any longer, and we all piled out, looking around. But there was no sign of anyone. No one had been there. The campsite was as quiet as it had been when we first arrived, and the tracks we thought we'd seen in the ground were gone. We looked for signs of whoever or whatever had been around us, but there was nothing. No footprints, no traces, just the quiet of the forest. As we packed up to leave, none of us said much. We all knew what we had experienced, and though we couldn't explain it, we were all shaken. That night, whatever had been in the woods with us wasn't human, and we were lucky that it didn't come any closer. To this day, we've never talked about it much. Maybe we were all just drunk, maybe we heard things that weren't there, but something happened that night, and none of us will ever forget it. Even now, I can't help but wonder if we were just a little too close to something we shouldn't have been. The late afternoon sun was dipping low when we arrived at the camping spot. It was a small clearing, surrounded by tall pines that stretched far and wide, their tops swaying gently in the breeze. The ground was soft and covered with pine needles, a faint smell of damp earth and moss lingering in the air. The place was quiet except for the distant call of birds and the occasional rustling of leaves. The kind of quiet that felt deep, like it was hiding something just beneath the surface. We set up the tents on the edge of the clearing, close enough to the forest so that we could hear it breathing, but far enough to have a clear view of the sky. I worked slowly, careful with the tent poles and stakes, feeling the tension in my fingers as I hammered them into the ground. The other campers moved around, collecting firewood and sorting gear, but I stayed quiet, letting the calm of the place settle over me. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, the forest began to change. Shadows lengthened and darkened until the whole area was wrapped in a thick twilight. The air cooled, and the smell of pine grew stronger, mixed now with the faint scent of wet earth. The wind whispered softly through the branches, sending tiny twigs and dry leaves to skitter across the ground. I started a fire in the pit we had dug earlier. The flame crackled and spat, throwing flickering orange light on the nearby trees. The warmth was comforting against the chill that had settled in the air. The others gathered around, roasting marshmallows and sharing snacks. I sat back, watching the fire dance, listening to the sounds of the night slowly waking up. Birds stopped singing, replaced by the occasional call of an owl somewhere deep in the woods. The wind shifted and picked up, making the branches overhead creak and groan. Somewhere far off, a branch snapped sharply. I didn't think much of it at first. Animals moved through the forest all the time, but the sound was close enough to pull my attention. The sky above was clear now, dotted with stars that twinkled softly. The Milky Way stretched out like a pale river across the darkness. The firelight made the shadows move in strange, flickering shapes that played tricks on the eyes. The woods around us felt alive and watchful. After the fire had burned low, I decided to walk a little deeper into the forest, just to stretch my legs and breathe in the night air. I told no one. The others were busy cleaning up and preparing to sleep. The moment I stepped beyond the clearing, the temperature dropped noticeably. The forest felt thicker here, the trees closer together, their trunks rough and dark in the moonlight. I moved slowly, my footsteps soft against the layer of needles and dry leaves. The silence was almost total, broken only by my breathing and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. My eyes tried to adjust to the dark, but everything was just shapes and shadows. I felt a quiet tension growing inside me, a sense that I wasn't alone. I wasn't afraid yet, just alert, sensing something shifting in the woods. Then I heard it, a heavy breath, close and steady, coming from somewhere to my right. I froze. The breath was slow, deep, almost deliberate. I strained my eyes, scanning the darkness between the trees, but I couldn't see anything. The breath stopped, then started again, louder this time, and there was movement. A slow, deliberate step. I didn't run immediately. Part of me wanted to see what it was, to know what was out there. The other part screamed at me to get back to the camp. The steps grew louder and heavier. I could hear the brush rustling as something large moved closer. My heart was pounding now, my hands trembling slightly. I turned and started walking back toward the clearing, my pace quickening with every step. The breaths followed me, heavy and close, but I didn't look back. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees blurring into dark shapes. The firelight was nowhere in sight. I could hear the others, faint voices carried by the wind, but they felt far away. Suddenly, a large shape blocked my path. I stopped dead, my breath caught in my throat. It was dark and massive, its outline barely visible in the moonlight. The shape moved slowly, circling me. I could hear the soft crack of branches under its weight. I knew it wasn't a person. It wasn't a deer or a small animal. It was something bigger, heavier, something that didn't belong near the camp. I slowly raised my hand, trying not to show panic. I fumbled for the flashlight I had in my jacket pocket, my fingers trembling as I clicked it on. A sharp beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on the animal. Its eyes caught the beam, glowing faintly red, reflecting back at me. It was a bear. The bear was close, too close, its massive body tense and still. It watched me silently, breathing heavily. I could see the scars on its face, the ragged fur around its neck. It was neither aggressive nor calm. It was simply there, watching, deciding what to do. I knew that sudden moves could provoke it, but standing frozen wasn't much better. Slowly, I started backing away, keeping my light trained on the bear. The ground was uneven, and my foot caught on a root, making me stumble. The bear let out a low grunt and shifted forward. My heart pounded so loud it felt like it might burst. I managed to scramble to my feet and continued backing away, shouting loudly to scare it off. The bear hesitated, then turned and disappeared into the trees with a heavy rustle. I didn't stop moving until I was back in the clearing, safe among the tents and the warm glow of the dying fire. My chest heaved as I collapsed on the ground, my hands still shaking. The others looked at me with wide eyes, asking without words what had happened. I told them about the bear and how close it had come. We quickly checked the camp for anything that might attract the animal. Food scraps, garbage, anything with a smell. We moved everything into sealed containers and made sure the fire was still burning. None of us spoke much after that. The night felt different now, heavier, more dangerous. We stayed close together, taking turns keeping watch until dawn. Every sound made me jump. A snapping branch, a distant howl, the whisper of wind through the trees. But the bear did not return. When morning finally came, the forest looked calm and peaceful again. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting warm light on the ground. The night's fear faded slowly, replaced by relief and tiredness. We packed up quickly after breakfast, leaving the clearing behind. As we drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the bear watching us go. But there was nothing there, just the quiet woods stretching out under a clear blue sky. The experience stayed with me for a long time. It reminded me how wild and unpredictable nature can be, how easily things can change from calm to dangerous. I never forgot the weight of those glowing eyes in the dark, or the slow, heavy breath just inches away. I learned that night to respect the woods and its creatures, to be prepared, and to never underestimate how close danger can come, even when you think you're safe. That camping trip ended without injury, but it left a mark, a real reminder that the wild is alive, and it's always watching. It was supposed to be a simple Girl Scout trip. Nothing too serious, nothing too out of the ordinary. Just a weekend camping trip with a bunch of my classmates, all of us in our junior high uniforms, ready for a little outdoor adventure. My school had set it up, and to be honest, I wasn't expecting much more than the usual. A little hiking, a campfire, maybe some ghost stories, nothing that would stick with me forever. We arrived at the site in the late afternoon, a large open area in the middle of a military base. The base was old, probably decades old, with a few weathered buildings scattered around, but it had that kind of charm that old places have. The trees surrounding us were tall and dense, their branches thick enough to block out most of the sky, and the air smelled fresh, like pine and earth. I remember the sounds too, the wind rustling through the leaves and the occasional distant clank of something metal, probably from the old equipment left behind. The day was a blur of activities. Some of us worked on knots, others learned to cook over a fire, and then there were those who spent time hiking around the area. It wasn't until later that evening, just as the sun was setting and the air started to cool, that things started to feel different. Our supervisor, Ms. Hartley, a tall woman with short, dark hair and a no-nonsense attitude, gathered us all together. She told us it was time for a night walk through the forest trail. Everyone was a bit reluctant. I mean, we were all a bit uneasy in the dark, but it wasn't the dark itself that was the problem. It was the stories. Ms. Hartley was famous for telling creepy stories to get us hyped up, but she really went all in this time. The quality of the microphone she used was awful. Static crackled and distorted most of what she said, but she still managed to get her point across. I don't remember all of it, but there was something about soldiers from the old military base, how they used to patrol these woods, and how some of them never came back. There were stories about strange sounds in the night and how some people thought they saw things moving just outside the range of their flashlights. It wasn't exactly terrifying, but it was enough to make everyone feel a little uneasy, especially since we were walking through the woods at night with only our flashlights to guide the way. We began our hike, a long line of girls walking silently, the only sounds being our footsteps crunching against the forest floor and the occasional murmur from someone ahead of me. I stayed near the back of the group, mostly because I wasn't in the mood to be close to anyone. Besides, the further I was from the front, the less I could hear of the ongoing conversation. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the trail ahead, the flickering beams of light dancing in front of my feet. But then something happened that threw me off. A scream, a loud, sharp scream that echoed through the trees. The girls in the front of the line jumped back in panic, their voices rising in a chorus of whispers and gasps. We all froze for a second, waiting for something, anything to happen. My heart started racing. Was it one of the stories Miss Hartley had told us? Was it one of the soldiers she mentioned coming back to haunt us? I felt a chill run down my spine. Then, from up ahead, someone shouted, "It's okay. It's just me." It was Miss Hartley. She had somehow disappeared from the front of the group and was now standing at the far side of the path. I don't know how she got there, or when exactly she left her position, but she was standing in front of us, smiling. We all sighed in relief. A few of the girls let out nervous laughs. "You scared the hell out of us," someone called out, half laughing, half shaken. "I didn't mean to," Ms. Hartley called back. She sounded amused, but also a little apologetic. "But it's all part of the adventure, right?" At that point, we all shrugged it off. It was just a little scare, nothing to worry about. We'd split up after that, heading towards the meeting point near the campfire. But the whole group was still a bit on edge. There were jokes and giggles, but I noticed something strange as we walked. Miss Hartley was with us again, but something didn't feel right. Maybe it was because she had just appeared out of nowhere, or maybe it was the way she looked at us. But there was this lingering feeling in the air that I couldn't shake. When we finally reached the meeting point, we saw another supervisor standing there, Ms. Hartley's colleague, a woman named Mrs. Daniels. She was standing near the fire, looking completely calm, as though she had been there for a while. But that wasn't what caught everyone's attention. The weird part was Ms. Hartley was still with us. She was standing near the back of the group, chatting quietly with one of the girls, as though she had never left. The girls who had been talking to her before froze. They turned to Mrs. Daniels, then back to Ms. Hartley. A few of them started to whisper, exchanging confused looks. "Didn't Ms. Hartley just show up with us?" one of them asked. "Wasn't she ahead of us the whole time?" We all started talking amongst ourselves, wondering if we had missed something. The whole thing seemed strange, like a trick or some sort of prank. But why would she play a prank on us? It didn't make sense. "Wait a minute." One of the girls spoke up, turning to Ms. Hartley. "When did you get here? How did you end up with us?" Ms. Hartley laughed, brushing it off like it was nothing. "Oh, I've been here for a long time now. You must not have noticed." We all stared at her, unsure of what to say. No one knew what to make of it. Why had she said that? And if she'd been there for a while, why hadn't anyone seen her earlier? The conversation died down, and some of us wandered off to sit around the campfire. Others went to get something to drink, still talking in hushed voices. It felt like a strange shift in the atmosphere, like something wasn't quite right, but we couldn't put our finger on it. Then, as the night wore on, a few of us went back to Miss Hartley, asking her more about what had happened. We were still curious, even though we didn't really expect an answer. She told us that she hadn't left the spot we had last seen her. In fact, she had been there the entire time. She looked at us, confused, as if we had misunderstood. "But we saw you earlier," one of my friends insisted. "You were with us at the front of the group and then you weren't. You popped up later like you were following us." Ms. Hartley shook her head. "No, I've been right here. I don't know what you're talking about." It didn't make sense. It was like she was denying the fact that she'd been somewhere else just a few minutes ago. Was she messing with us? But why would she? This wasn't the time for pranks. We were on a serious trip, not some joke at the expense of our nerves. The conversation ended, and eventually, we all split up to head to our tents. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about it. What if Ms. Hartley wasn't lying? What if something had happened, and we didn't see it? Maybe she had been there all along, and we just hadn't noticed. Maybe we'd all been caught up in the moment, the excitement and tension of the hike, and our brains had just played tricks on us. But it was hard to shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't the kind of thing that could easily be explained away. Something about the way Ms. Hartley had acted, the way she had just appeared, felt strange. Maybe it was a simple misunderstanding. Maybe we were just overthinking it. But then again, what if we weren't? The sun had long disappeared behind the thick ridges of the Southern California mountains when the woods around the camp grew quiet, except for the faint rustling of leaves and distant coyote howls. I was working as a counselor at this camp, deep in the forest where the air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the night sky was a blanket of stars like I'd never seen in the city. The camp itself felt like a world apart. Out here, you were never really alone. Deer would slip silently through the underbrush, foxes darted between trees, and every now and then, someone spotted a mountain lion lurking just beyond the far edges of the camp. The woods were beautiful but wild, and the camp's old cabins were scattered among shadows and whispers of the past. Some spots carried a strange vibe, places where you could almost feel the weight of things long gone, where people said the land had stories and maybe secrets, but nothing we could ever quite put our finger on. That night, after putting my campers to bed, I stepped outside the cabin to cool off. The air was crisp, the kind that made your breath come out in little clouds. I stood with another counselor, just chatting quietly, listening to the sounds of the forest. Coyotes yipping in the distance, leaves crunching somewhere nearby. The camp was peaceful in a way that felt both calming and unsettling, like you were part of something much bigger but also much darker. Suddenly, Sadie came sprinting down the path, her face pale and wide-eyed. Behind her trailed her entire teenage girls' cabin, about 12 of them, all dressed in black from head to toe, moving fast and looking terrified. Sadie was usually one of the calmest counselors I knew, always rational, never one to jump at shadows or let fear get the better of her. But that night, she was a different person. She barreled right past us without slowing down, shouting over her shoulder that she thought she'd heard a ghost and that once her campers were asleep, she'd meet me back by my cabin to explain everything and try to figure out what was going on. I stayed rooted for a moment, watching the group hurry away into the darkness, their black clothes blending with the night. The way they moved, so tense, so panicked, set a knot in my stomach. Ghosts weren't something I believed in, but something about the way Sadie looked shook me. This wasn't just campfire storytelling or a silly prank gone wrong. About 30 minutes later, when the campers were finally quiet and the forest had settled into its deep night rhythm again, Sadie showed up at my cabin. Her breathing was still heavy from running, her face flushed from the adrenaline. She told me about the night hike she had taken with her group. It had started out as a fun idea. She'd made the campers dress all in black and pretend to be ninjas, sneaking through the woods trying to be quiet and blend into the shadows. It was supposed to be a game, a way to get them moving and laughing before bed, to feel brave and adventurous. The girls had loved it, sneaking around tree trunks, whispering and darting between shadows. But then, on their way back to camp, they passed a spot on the trail that was darker than the rest. A patch of thick forest where the canopy closed tightly overhead, blocking out even the moonlight. Just beyond the tree-line, they heard it. Faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. Then louder. A small, desperate voice calling help. It sounded like a child. Sadie said the voice was clear enough that everyone stopped and listened. But each time it came, the sound twisted and warped, growing more distorted and unnatural. It started to sound less like a child's voice and more like something else entirely, like an animal or something trying to imitate a child but failing horribly. The kids froze, then panic hit. They bolted down the trail, not stopping until they were back in camp. I could feel the tension in her voice as she described it. This wasn't just a prank or a wild animal howling. This was something that rattled everyone, especially Sadie. We decided to be responsible and see what was really going on. We grabbed flashlights and headed toward that part of the trail. The forest was silent except for our footsteps and the steady thrum of night insects. The deeper we went, the thicker the shadows became. When we got close to the spot Sadie described, the air felt heavier, colder somehow. Then we heard it. The sound wasn't faint anymore. It echoed from somewhere just beyond the trees. A long, drawn-out screech that tried to sound like a child screaming for help, but it was shrill, harsh, and unnatural. It didn't come from a single place. It felt like it was all around us, coming from the entire mountain slope, the trees seeming to carry the sound and twist it, like the forest itself was screaming. The sound filled the air and made my skin crawl. Sadie grabbed my arm, and without a word, we turned and ran. Our footsteps pounded on the dirt path as we sprinted back toward camp, the horrible screams fading behind us but never completely disappearing in the silence between. When we finally reached the main camp area, safe under the glow of porch lights and the watchful eyes of the other counselors, we told the story to anyone who would listen. Most just laughed or shook their heads, assuming we were messing with them or imagining things. The next morning, the camp director called a meeting. They told us to reassure the kids that the strange sounds were just bobcats, wild animals that lived in the area and made high-pitched yelping noises at night. Harmless, they said, just nature doing its thing. Everyone was supposed to tell the campers not to be scared. Despite the explanation, Sadie and I couldn't shake the memory of that sound. It didn't sound like any animal we'd heard before. It wasn't just a yelp or a howl. It was something else, something twisted and eerie, like the forest had a dark voice of its own. For the rest of the summer, our friends never let us live it down. They joked about us hearing ghosts or being scared of our own shadows. But deep down, we both knew that night was something we wouldn't forget. The night when the woods seemed to call out in a way no one should ever hear. Even now, thinking back to that moment standing there in the dark, listening to that horrible scream coming from everywhere and nowhere, I feel the weight of those woods pressing in, reminding me that some places hold secrets too wild and strange to explain away. And sometimes it's better not to know what's really out there. That was one of those hot summer days where the air felt thick, like it could smother you if you weren't careful. The kind of day when the sun beats down relentlessly, but there's a quiet, almost lazy breeze that sneaks in every now and then, cool enough that you barely notice it at first, but later, when the sun starts going down, you're thankful for it. We were all at my uncle's place, a house he built himself out on this huge stretch of land, way far from any other houses. I remember someone saying the nearest neighbor was at least 2 miles away, and that was probably mostly woods and cow pastures in between. You could see why my uncle loved it out there. His house sat like a hidden gem in the middle of all that space. It wasn't flashy, but it was solid, with weathered wood that had taken on this rich, dark color from years of sun and rain. The deck wrapped all the way around it, wide enough for people to spread out. That deck had become the heart of the party. Kids running around chasing each other, adults sitting in folding chairs or leaning against the railings, some talking, others just watching the kids or sipping cold drinks. The smell of grilled meat lingered in the air along with the faint scent of grass and wood smoke. Somewhere off in the distance, a cow mooed, and occasionally you could hear a bird calling out before it settled back into the quiet. It was one of those days where everyone just relaxed. The sun was blazing hot, but the breeze kept it from being unbearable. I was hanging out, chatting with some of the cousins, when someone asked me to run into town to pick up more groceries. The party was going strong, but we were running low on ice, drinks, and some last-minute snacks. It felt like a small task, so I grabbed my keys and my jacket and headed out. The dirt road leading from the house was narrow and bumpy, twisting through the trees and past the fields where the cattle grazed. The farther I drove, the quieter it got. The woods closed in tighter around the road. The sun filtered through thick leaves, casting deep shadows that made everything seem darker than it was. I remember the grocery store being almost too bright, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the cold air conditioning a sharp contrast to the heat outside. I moved quickly, grabbing what we needed: ice bags, bottled water, some sodas, chips, and a few other things that were probably forgotten when we first set up. The cashier barely looked up as I paid, and I was soon back on the road. By then, the sky had started to change. The sun was low, the light softer, but the shadows had grown long and stretched across the road like dark fingers. The trip back felt different. The road that seemed so calm earlier now felt like it was closing in around me. The trees looked taller, their branches clawing at the fading light. The only sounds were my car's tires crunching on the gravel and the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of leaves in the wind. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind me or some sign that I wasn't alone. The darkness came fast that time of year, almost like a switch flipped, and by the time I pulled back up to my uncle's house, the sky was completely black. I flipped on my headlights as I rolled down the driveway. That's when I saw it. Sitting right in front of my car, facing the house, was something I didn't expect to see that close, especially with all the people around. A panther. The black shape sat perfectly still, its sleek body outlined by the dim light from my headlights. Its eyes caught the beam and reflected a cold, almost eerie glow. For a moment, it didn't move, just stared straight ahead at the party. It wasn't nervous or scared of the light. It seemed calm, like it belonged there, like it was waiting for something or someone. What froze me was where it had chosen to sit, right near the edge of where all the kids were playing. The panther was perfectly positioned on the border between the noisy, bright party and the dark, quiet woods beyond. It was almost like it was watching them, waiting, studying. I kept the headlights trained on it, heart pounding in my chest. The panther turned its head slightly and glanced back at me, as if acknowledging that it had been seen. Then, almost unbelievably, it let out a breath that sounded like a human sigh, deep, slow, and full of this strange tiredness. It was like it knew I was there, knew it had been caught and didn't care. After that, the panther stood up, stretched its lithe body with a grace that was almost hypnotic, and turned away. It walked calmly into the woods, disappearing almost immediately into the blackness, like a shadow melting into the night. I sat there, frozen behind the wheel, feeling my pulse hammer in my ears. For what felt like a long time, I just stared at the spot where it had vanished. The party was still going on behind the house, but it all seemed distant and unreal now. My mind was racing, trying to process what I had just seen. A panther, that close, that bold, so near the kids. Eventually, I shook myself out of the trance. I had to get out and warn everyone. But even then, the thought of stepping out of the car and walking toward a group of people with a panther nearby felt like something out of a nightmare. I took a deep breath, grabbed the groceries, and slowly stepped out onto the gravel driveway. The night air hit me, cooler now but still heavy. The sounds of laughter and kids running mixed with the rustling trees and distant cricket calls. I walked toward the house, every shadow suddenly suspicious. I kept glancing back toward where the panther had been, half expecting it to come back or see another one lurking. When I finally reached the deck, the atmosphere was still festive. People didn't seem to notice the darkness pressing in around us. The kids were still running and shouting, chasing each other in circles, unaware of the silent watcher from the woods. I stood there for a moment, heart still pounding, trying to find the right way to tell them all without causing a panic. The last thing anyone needed was to turn a fun evening into chaos. But the truth was clear. That panther had come close, closer than any of us had expected. It had been watching, waiting on the edge of the light and noise, near the children. It was a stark reminder. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, the wild wasn't far away. It was just on the edge of the party, just beyond the deck's railing, waiting. And sometimes it got bold enough to step into the light. I had always wanted to see the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho, the jagged peaks, the deep valleys carved by glaciers, the way the rivers sparkled in the afternoon sun. It was exactly the kind of place I wanted to lose myself for a while. A few friends and I planned a backpacking trip for a week, carrying everything we needed on our backs. The plan was simple. Hike in, set camp somewhere deep in the valley, and just be there with nothing but the wilderness around us. The day we reached the valley floor, It was late afternoon. The valley was narrow, surrounded on both sides by steep rocky walls. Those cliffs looked unforgiving, like something carved out by an ancient force. The rocks were jagged and sharp-edged, stacked into chaotic piles as if the earth had been ripped open and then slowly pushed back together. Trees clung to the slopes, mostly fir and pine, but there were patches where the rock was bare and smooth, and I could see scree fields, loose rock that would tumble down at any moment. We picked a flat spot near a small stream that trickled quietly through the valley bottom. The water was cold and clear, the kind you could drink without a filter if you trusted it. We set up our tents in a loose circle, each of us trying to find the most level ground we could. The light was fading quickly. The sun, blocked by the tall valley walls, disappeared earlier here than it would have in the open. The air cooled fast, and a sharp breeze came down from the cliffs, rustling the trees. Dinner was quiet. We all ate without much talk, probably tired from the day's hike and soaking in the quiet around us. No phones, no distractions, just the occasional chirp of birds settling in for the night. I remember looking up at the sky before crawling into my tent. The stars were unbelievably bright, more than I'd ever seen in the city, scattered thick like salt sprinkled over black velvet. I fell asleep easily, worn out from the day's hike. Then, in the middle of the night, something woke me up. At first, I wasn't sure what it was. It sounded like a distant rumble, low and deep, the kind of sound you might hear far away during a thunderstorm, but there was no thunder. As my mind cleared, I realized it wasn't distant at all. It was close. The sound grew louder, sharper, like huge stones smashing against trees and each other as they tumbled downhill. The valley walls echoed the noise, amplifying the sound and making it impossible to ignore. It wasn't one rock falling. It was a whole chain of them, crashing, breaking, rolling. Trees cracked and snapped as the boulders crushed everything in their path. I felt my heart pound hard in my chest. The ground seemed to shake with every heavy thud. I couldn't see anything. My tent was black inside, and outside it was pitch dark. The valley walls blocked out the moon and any starlight. I thought about running out, maybe to get somewhere safer, but there was nowhere to run. The valley was narrow, and the rocks could be coming from either side. Even if I got out of my tent, I wouldn't be able to see where the rocks were falling. It would be like running blind into a thunderstorm of giant stones. There was no safe path, no clear direction to escape. I lay still, frozen in place, breathing hard and listening to the chaos outside. The noise came closer and closer, the sound of smashing wood and stone getting louder. My mind raced, imagining giant boulders crashing into the camp, breaking tents and crushing everything. I pictured the valley walls shaking, small rocks and dust falling on us even if the big boulders missed. Time stretched out, seconds feeling like minutes. I was trapped in that dark, cramped space, helpless. I kept telling myself it was just nature doing what it does, that rock slides happen all the time in mountains like this. It wasn't anything unusual or special, just dangerous. But knowing that didn't stop the fear. After what felt like forever, the noise slowly began to fade. The crashes got quieter, then almost stopped. Silence returned, except for the steady rush of the stream nearby and the wind through the trees. I didn't move for a while, not sure if it was safe to come out yet. When the sky started to lighten with the first hint of dawn, I finally unzipped my tent and stepped outside. My friends were all out too, looking around with tired, worried faces. We checked the camp for damage. Everything was exactly as we left it. No broken tents, no smashed gear, no rocks anywhere near our site. It was like the rock slide had passed far above us, or maybe off to the side. We walked around the edges of the valley looking for signs of the rocks. There were no large boulders near the camp, no trees knocked down. I could see the steep slopes on both sides, and sure enough, there were small piles of loose rock and some broken branches higher up. Probably the source of the noise, but it was hard to believe how close the rock slide had felt. That feeling of helplessness, lying in the dark with no way to escape, stuck with me. It was unsettling. Out there in the wild, you are small and powerless, completely at the mercy of the land. No matter how prepared you think you are, the mountains have their own plans. The rest of the trip went by slowly after that. We stayed alert, scanning the cliffs each time we moved. The valley seemed peaceful in daylight, but I never forgot that night. It was a reminder that nature doesn't negotiate or wait. It acts on its own time. When I finally hiked out, I kept looking back over my shoulder. The steep walls of the valley looked quiet and still, but I knew better now. At any moment, those rocks could come tumbling down again, and there would be nothing anyone could do to stop it. I was alone in the woods. Nothing unusual for me, really. I'd spent the weekend at the same campground before, in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but the trees and the occasional sound of a bird or a squirrel darting across the underbrush. It was supposed to be a peaceful trip, just me and the wilderness for a few days to get away from everything. The kind of place where you can let your guard down, forget the noise of the world, and just be. The campsite was nestled in a quiet valley, surrounded by tall pines and thick underbrush, with a stream running just beyond the trees. I had set up my tent near a clearing, away from the main trail. I didn't mind the isolation. It gave me peace of mind, the kind of peace you can only find when you're far from civilization, where there are no people and no distractions, just the sounds of nature. The sun was low in the sky when I arrived, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I spent the evening collecting firewood and getting everything ready for the night. As the light faded and the fire grew, I cooked a simple meal, sitting close to the warmth of the flames. It was quiet, too quiet. You know, that kind of silence where the sounds of nature seem distant, like they're not quite there? It was one of those nights. No rustling in the trees, no chirping of crickets, just the crackle of the fire. I sat there watching the flames dance and shift, and I felt that nagging sensation at the back of my mind, the kind you get when something feels off, even if you can't place what it is. It wasn't the first time I had spent a night alone in the woods, but this time felt different. Maybe it was the stillness of the place, the way the forest seemed to be holding its breath. Or maybe it was the fact that I was alone, really alone, for the first time in a long while. I shook the feeling off, thinking I was just being paranoid. After eating, I decided to take a walk. It had been a while since I'd gotten out to explore the area. My mind was restless, and a walk always seemed to clear things up. I grabbed my flashlight and a jacket, and I set off down the narrow trail that led away from the campsite. The air had a chill to it, a crispness that made me pull my jacket tighter around my shoulders. The path was well worn, and the trees formed a dense canopy overhead, blocking out most of the moonlight. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of the trail in front of me. I walked for about 20 minutes, just lost in the quiet of the forest, when I noticed something odd. There was a slight disruption in the underbrush to the side of the trail. Something looked out of place, like the foliage had been disturbed. Caught my attention, but it wasn't anything that would have set off alarms. Still, something in me urged caution, so I approached slowly, keeping my flashlight pointed down to get a better look. When I pushed through the branches, that's when I saw him. At first, it didn't register. I just thought it was some animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but then the flashlight beam landed on him, and my heart skipped a beat. He was lying there in a crumpled heap, face down. The body was sprawled across the forest floor, arms twisted unnaturally to the sides. His legs were splayed awkwardly, one bent at a strange angle. I froze. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. I took a step back, then another. This wasn't right. This wasn't an animal, not even close. It was a person, a man, maybe in his late 30s or early 40s, dressed in a t-shirt and jeans that were torn in places, as if he had been dragged through the underbrush. His skin had a sickly, pale hue to it, and his face was streaked with dirt, his eyes wide open but glazed over. There was no sign of life in him. His mouth was slightly open, and there was something dark around his lips, a dried, crusted substance that I didn't want to think about. My breath caught in my throat, and my mind raced. I had no idea who he was or how long he had been there. My first instinct was to turn around and run back to camp, but something held me in place. I couldn't just leave him there. I had to make sure he wasn't still alive, that he wasn't just unconscious. But I knew deep down that was a lie I was telling myself. He was gone. I knelt down beside him, cautiously, trying not to touch anything. The forest seemed to press in around me, the air thick with the scent of decay. It wasn't just the body. It was the smell of something foul, something that had been left to rot in the damp earth for too long. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as I reached out, hesitating just a moment before gently pushing his shoulder with the tip of my flashlight. His body was cold, colder than it should have been. He had been there for a while. I stood up quickly, a chill running down my spine. It was hard to think, hard to focus. The only thing I knew for sure was that I needed to get out of there. I needed to get back to camp and call for help. But there was one thing I couldn't shake. The way he had been left, sprawled out like that so deliberately. It wasn't just a random death. It looked like he had been placed there. Someone had done this. I backed away slowly, my heart racing. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, to run, but I couldn't. I had to make sure it wasn't someone I knew. Maybe he was just lost, an unfortunate soul who had wandered into the woods and collapsed. But something told me it wasn't that simple. I couldn't just walk away. The path back to camp felt longer than it should have, the shadows in the trees shifting and stretching as if they were following me. The flashlight in my hand trembled, the beam wavering with every step. I was starting to panic, my breath coming in short gasps. I tried to keep calm, but my mind was filled with questions. Most of them I didn't want to answer. Who was he? What happened to him? And why the hell was he out here alone? When I finally reached the clearing, I ran straight to my tent, heart pounding, and locked the zipper behind me. I didn't care that it was just me out here. I didn't care that it was dark. I couldn't shake the image of that man's lifeless body lying in the woods. I sat in my tent for what felt like hours, too afraid to go back and investigate further, too terrified to sleep. The night dragged on, each passing minute feeling like an eternity. Eventually, the sun began to rise, and I knew I had to leave. I couldn't stay there another minute. I packed up my things as quickly as I could, my hands shaking the entire time. The forest outside was eerily quiet, the same quiet that had unsettled me the night before. I walked to my car, keeping my eyes on the trail, half expecting to see something, or someone, moving in the shadows. It wasn't until I was safely in my car, driving away, that I finally allowed myself to breathe. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I navigated the winding road that led out of the woods. I couldn't get the image of that man out of my head, nor could I stop thinking about how his body had been so carelessly discarded in the forest, like a piece of trash left to rot. I didn't go to the authorities. I didn't report it. Couldn't. I didn't know how to explain what I had seen. I didn't have the words. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the thought that, in the end, it wouldn't have mattered. I'd seen enough death in my life to know that sometimes things happen, and you're left to deal with the consequences. But that's the thing about the woods. They hold secrets. They don't let go of things easily. And sometimes, no matter how hard you try to forget, those secrets find their way to you.